What if reality isn't what we think it is, but rather a fragile illusion, held together by nothing more than our collective perception? A delicate construction that could unravel with a single question. Tonight, we journey into the space between certainty and doubt, where paradoxes twist the fabric of time, truth, and logic. Are they puzzles waiting to be solved? Or perhaps fragments of dreams we haven't yet awakened from? Imagine you've discovered time travel. You journey backward until you face your grandfather, before he met your grandmother. In a curious impulse, you prevent their meeting, creating the grandfather paradox. If your grandparents never meet, you would never exist. But if you never existed, how could you travel back? The timeline folds in on itself, creating an impossible loop where cause and effect chase each other. Would reality reweave itself around this contradiction? Or would you exist in quantum uncertainty, both there and not there? Perhaps time isn't linear, but a tapestry where every moment exists simultaneously, and our perception is merely the needle pulling through the cloth. But what if truth, the foundation of our understanding, is equally unstable? Consider, this statement is false. The liar paradox emerges. If the statement is true, then it must be false. But if it's false, then it must be true. Truth and falsehood collapse into each other, creating a logical impossibility that shouldn't exist, yet it does. If you cannot trust these words, what can you trust? Is reality a lie we've collectively agreed to believe? The boundaries between truth and falsehood blur like consciousness drifting towards sleep. What if you cannot name the color in your mind? The moment you try to capture it in words, you've transformed it. The paradox of definition shows that naming something changes our relationship to it. The indescribable becomes described, and something essential is lost. Could our attempts to understand reality prevent us from experiencing it fully? Are our sciences and philosophies mere simplifications of a reality too complex to comprehend? Consider Zeno's paradox. Before crossing a room, you must travel halfway. But before reaching halfway, you must travel a quarter. This infinite regression suggests motion should be impossible, yet we move, seemingly performing the impossible with every step. What other impossibilities might we navigate daily, blind to contradictions that should render our existence impossible? Perhaps the most profound paradox is consciousness itself. Your mind observing itself observing. Who is the watcher behind your eyes? If you try to find the self, it recedes from view, like trying to see your eyes without a mirror. What if your understanding of self is just a dream? Is it possible our waking lives are no more real than dreams we forget? The paradoxes of time, truth, definition, motion, and consciousness all suggest reality itself might be a paradox, a thing that cannot exist, yet undeniably does. As you drift deeper into contemplation, consider, what if we are the dreamers, and our dreams are the only reality we know? Perhaps the greatest illusion is not that reality is fluid, but that it's solid at all. In that space between certainty and doubt, between waking and sleeping, lies our existence, a paradox too beautiful to resolve. Sleep well, dream deeply, and remember, sometimes questions are more valuable than any answers we might find. The paradox of existence. Have you ever wondered if you truly exist? Not in the trivial sense of your physical form, but in the deeper currents of reality itself. What if existence isn't what we've been led to believe? Perhaps we're merely thoughts in a vast cosmic mind, flickering in and out of awareness, like stars blinking in the night sky. Tonight, we explore paradoxes that challenge our most fundamental assumptions about being. These aren't mere puzzles of logic, but doorways to understanding the nature of reality itself. As your mind begins to drift and wander, consider that the very question of existence may be its own beautiful contradiction. Imagine yourself standing before a mirror. You see a reflection, a perfect copy of yourself staring back. But is that truly you? The reflection moves when you move, speaks when you speak, yet exists in a world behind the glass that you can never touch. The reflection exists, yet doesn't exist. It is you, yet isn't you. This duality, this contradiction, lies at the heart of existence itself. The ancient philosopher Zeno once proposed that motion is impossible. Before you can travel a distance, you must first travel half that distance. But before you can travel half, you must travel a quarter. and before that, an eighth, an infinite series of smaller distances. How then do we ever begin to move at all? Yet here you are, breathing, thinking, being. Your very existence defies logic. Consider the atoms that form your body. They're mostly empty space, collections of energy vibrating in patterns too complex to fully comprehend. These atoms replace themselves continually throughout your life. The body you inhabit now is not the same collection of atoms you possessed 7 years ago. Are you still the same person? If every part of you has been replaced, what remains to anchor your existence? The paradox deepens when we consider consciousness. You know you exist because you think. But what is thinking? Electrical impulses and chemical reactions in a biological machine, or something more? If consciousness is merely the product of physics, is free will an illusion? And if free will is an illusion, what meaning does existence hold? Perhaps existence itself is recursive. You exist because you perceive. You perceive because you exist. Each defines and creates the other in an endless dance of being and awareness. What if you are a dream dreaming itself? A story telling itself, a universe observing itself? There's a meditative practice in which one repeatedly asks, who am I? Each answer, a body, a mind, a collection of experiences, is discarded, peeled away like layers of an onion. Eventually, one arrives not at an answer, but at the pure awareness that witnesses everything. Is this awareness who you truly are? And if so, does it transcend the paradoxes of physical existence? As your thoughts drift deeper, consider that existence may not be binary, to be or not to be, but rather a spectrum of being. You exist differently in your dreams than in your waking life. You exist differently in your memories than in the present moment. You exist differently in the minds of others than in your own perception. The paradox of existence invites us not to solve it, but to embrace it, to recognize that we are both wave and particle, both finite and infinite, both separate and connected. We are contradictions given form, impossibilities made manifest, and in that beautiful contradiction lies the mystery of being itself. What if existence isn't a state, but a process? Not a noun, but a verb. Not something you have, but something you do. As you contemplate these questions, allow your mind to settle into the gentle rhythm of not knowing, of being comfortable with the mystery, for it is in embracing the paradox, rather than resolving it, that we truly begin to understand what it means to exist. Are you real? What does it mean to be real? As your mind wanders through the corridors of perception tonight, consider this question not as academic philosophy, but as an intimate inquiry into the nature of your own experience. What if reality isn't something that happens to you, but something you create with every thought, every sensation, every moment of awareness? The boundary between what is real and what is imagined grows thin as we explore this paradox. Consider your dreams. While dreaming, the impossible becomes ordinary. You fly above cities, speak with the departed, inhabit other bodies and lives. In those moments, your brain cannot distinguish between dream and waking life. Both experiences are equally real to your consciousness. So what makes your waking life more real than your dreams? There's a story about a philosopher who dreamed he was a butterfly. Upon waking, he wondered, am I a man who dreamed of being a butterfly, or a butterfly now dreaming I am a man? The distinction seems clear to us, but only because we privilege one state of consciousness over another. What evidence do we have that this privileging is justified? Think about memory for a moment. Your sense of being real, of having continuity as a person, depends entirely on memory. Yet memory is notoriously unreliable. Studies show that each time we recall something, we subtly alter it, creating a new memory rather than accessing the original experience. Your past, the foundation of your identity, is largely a collection of stories you tell yourself, constantly revised and rewritten. Consider, too, the limitations of your senses. What you perceive as reality is merely the tiny sliver of existence your sensory organs can detect. Bees see ultraviolet patterns invisible to you. Elephants hear infrasonic rumbles that pass beneath your awareness. Dogs detect scents you cannot imagine. Is their reality less real than yours? Or is yours merely one perspective among countless others? Even what you do perceive is not what's out there, but a model created by your brain. The colors you see don't exist in the external world, only wavelengths of light that your visual cortex translates into the experience of color. The solidity of objects is largely an illusion. Atoms are mostly empty space. Your brain constructs reality rather than perceiving it directly. Perhaps most unsettling is the delay. Due to the time it takes for signals to travel from your senses to your brain and be processed, you're always experiencing a reality that's fractions of a second in the past. You never touch the present moment directly. You live perpetually in the wake of what has just been. Some philosophers suggest that consciousness itself might be an illusion, a story the brain tells itself to make sense of its own processes. If this is true, then who or what is experiencing this illusion? The question circles back on itself, a snake swallowing its own tail. Others propose that reality may be a vast interconnected field of information, with consciousness arising as patterns within this field become self-referential. In this view, you are real not as a separate entity, but as a temporary pattern, like a whirlpool in a flowing stream. The whirlpool exists, has causal effects on its environment, yet is nothing more than water moving in a particular way. As you ponder these possibilities, notice how your sense of reality shifts and changes. In moments of deep engagement, with art, with nature, with loved ones, reality feels vivid and undeniable. In moments of distraction or dissociation, the world can seem distant, dreamlike, less real. Reality isn't fixed, but fluid, responding to the quality of your attention. Perhaps being real isn't about existing independently of perception, but about the depth and authenticity of experience. Perhaps reality isn't something to be proven, but something to be lived, fully, presently, with all the awareness you can bring to this moment, and the next, and the next. What if you are real not despite these paradoxes, but because of them? What if the questioning itself is the most real thing about you? The simulation paradox. What if the reality you experience, with all its rich textures, complex emotions, and apparent solidity, is merely an elaborate simulation, a vast, intricate program running on hardware beyond your comprehension? As you settle into this contemplation, allow yourself to consider not just the possibility, but the implications of such a reality. The simulation hypothesis suggests that what we experience as reality could be an artificial construction, similar to a sophisticated video game or virtual reality environment. While this might sound like science fiction, respected philosophers and scientists have argued that it's not only possible, but by some calculations, highly probable. Consider the trajectory of our own technology. In mere decades, we've progressed from simple pixelated games to immersive virtual worlds that engage multiple senses. If technological advancement continues, it seems inevitable that we will eventually create simulations indistinguishable from reality. If such simulations become commonplace, the number of simulated realities could vastly outnumber the single base reality, making it statistically more likely that any given consciousness exists within a simulation rather than base reality. This creates a fascinating paradox. If advanced civilizations create numerous simulations containing conscious beings, and those simulated beings create their own simulations, the recursive pattern suggests an almost infinite regression of realities within realities. How would you know which level you inhabit? How could you determine if you are in the base reality or a simulation several layers deep? The answers become more elusive the deeper you look. Any test you might devise to determine whether your reality is simulated would itself be part of the simulation. The very laws of physics that you might use to disprove the simulation hypothesis could be programmed parameters, designed specifically to prevent you from detecting the true nature of your reality. This leads to profound questions about consciousness itself. If you are a simulated being, does that make your experiences less meaningful, your thoughts less valid, your emotions less real? Or is consciousness itself the one thing that cannot be simulated, the essential quality that makes you real, regardless of the substrate on which your existence runs? Some philosophers suggest that distinguishing between a perfect simulation and base reality may be meaningless. If the simulation creates conscious experiences indistinguishable from those in base reality, then perhaps the distinction itself is merely conceptual rather than substantive. Reality, in this view, is defined by the quality of experience rather than its origin. Others point to certain quirks in our universe, the quantization of energy, the limits of measurement imposed by quantum mechanics, the cosmic speed limit of light, as potential evidence that we live in an optimized simulation with built-in limitations to conserve computational resources. Even the seemingly arbitrary constants that govern our physics could be viewed as programmable parameters. If we are in a simulation, who or what created it, and for what purpose? Are we the primary focus of the simulation, or merely emergent phenomena in a system designed to study something else entirely? Is our universe a research project, entertainment for beings in a higher reality, or perhaps even a form of ancestor simulation created by our own descendants to understand their origins? The simulation paradox ultimately challenges our most basic assumptions about reality and forces us to confront the limitations of knowledge itself. Even if we are in a simulation, we can only understand it through the tools and concepts available within that simulation. We may be like characters in a novel trying to comprehend the nature of literature, or programs attempting to understand the hardware on which they run. As your mind explores these possibilities, notice how the very contemplation alters your perception. Does the world seem different when viewed as a simulation? Or does the essential quality of experience, the vividness of colors, the depth of emotions, the richness of connections, remain unchanged regardless of its ultimate nature? Perhaps the most profound aspect of the simulation paradox is that it doesn't ultimately matter whether our reality is base or simulated. The questions that define our existence, how to live meaningfully, how to connect authentically, how to reduce suffering, remain equally vital either way. The nature of goodness, beauty, and truth transcends the substrate of reality. What if the simulation itself is just another dream from which we have yet to awaken? The dreamer's paradox. Have you ever awakened from a dream so vivid, so convincing, that for a moment you weren't sure which reality was real? That disorienting threshold between dreaming and waking reveals a profound paradox, one that has fascinated philosophers, mystics, and scientists for millennia. What if the distinction between dreaming and waking life is not as clear as we believe? When you dream, an entire world unfolds within your mind. Landscapes stretch to distant horizons. People speak with voices you clearly hear. You feel emotions, terror, joy, longing, with unmistakable intensity. While immersed in the dream, you rarely question its reality. Only upon waking do you recognize the dream for what it was. But this recognition raises a troubling question. How can you be certain you've truly awakened? Consider that in a dream, you possess memories, often false ones created by the dream itself, that provide context and continuity to your dreaming experience. These memories feel as authentic as your waking memories. If dreams can fabricate convincing memories, how can you trust that your waking memories aren't equally fabricated? Your certainty that you are awake right now relies entirely on memories and perceptions that could themselves be part of an elaborate dream. This creates a peculiar logical trap. Any evidence you might gather to prove you're not dreaming would be meaningless if you were, in fact, dreaming that evidence. The dream would simply accommodate your test, creating whatever confirmation you seek. Even the sensation of pinching yourself could be dreamed. The apparent coherence and consistency of waking life might simply reflect a more stable and prolonged dream state. Ancient traditions worldwide have explored this paradox. Taoist philosopher Zhuangzi's butterfly dream, Australian Aboriginal dreamtime, Hindu concepts of Maya, cosmic illusion, and Gnostic ideas of the material world as a kind of sleep state all suggest that what we call waking life may be another form of dream. These traditions don't merely question reality. They suggest that awakening from our current state might reveal an entirely different order of existence. Modern neuroscience adds another layer to this paradox. Studies show that the brain regions active during dreaming substantially overlap with those active while awake. Both states involve the construction of a perceptual model that we experience as reality. The key difference may not be in the fundamental nature of the experiences, but in their stability, coherence, and relationship to sensory input. This raises profound questions about consciousness itself. If both dreaming and waking consciousness involve the creation of experiential models, what is the nature of the awareness that witnesses these models? Is there a core consciousness that persists through all states, waking, dreaming, deep sleep, observing each without being fully identified with any? Some traditions suggest that what we call awakening is merely shifting from one dream to another, perhaps a more stable and collective dream, but a dream nonetheless. True awakening, they propose, would mean recognizing the dreaming nature of all experience and becoming aware of the awareness itself, the unchanging witness behind changing states of consciousness. Consider also that dreams often reflect and process our waking experiences, while our waking thoughts and actions are shaped by our dreams. The boundary between states is permeable, each influencing and interpenetrating the other. Perhaps they are not separate realms, but different aspects of a continuous spectrum of consciousness. The dreamer's paradox invites us to hold multiple possibilities simultaneously, that what we call waking life might be another order of dream, that dreams might contain their own validity and reality, that the awareness witnessing both states might transcend the distinction between them. Rather than attempting to resolve these contradictions, what happens when we allow them to open us to greater wonder and presence? As you contemplate these possibilities, notice how your relationship to your present experience shifts. Does the world seem more dreamlike? Do you feel a different quality of presence? The boundary between certainty and mystery, between knowing and not knowing, becomes a fertile territory for exploration rather than a problem to be solved. Perhaps the most beautiful aspect of the dreamer's paradox is that it doesn't diminish our experience, but enriches it. Whether dream or waking life, this moment, with its sensations, thoughts, emotions, is arising in awareness now. The mystery isn't something to fear, but to embrace. The question isn't whether you are dreaming, but whether you are fully present for whatever experience is arising, dream or otherwise. What if awakening isn't about determining which state is real, but about being fully alive to the mystery unfolding in each moment, regardless of its ultimate nature? The observer's paradox. What if the very act of witnessing reality fundamentally changes what you see? What if your consciousness is not merely a passive observer, but an active creator of the world around you? Tonight, we drift into the mysterious realm of the observer's paradox, where the boundary between perceiver and perceived dissolves like morning mist. This isn't merely an intellectual exercise, it's a doorway into questioning the very nature of existence itself. Imagine yourself in a darkened room, watching quantum particles dance on a screen. Scientists have discovered something remarkable. These particles behave differently when observed. When no one is looking, they exist as waves of possibility, spreading through space like ripples on a pond. Yet the moment you focus your attention upon them, they collapse into definite positions, as if your consciousness itself has called them into being. What if this strange phenomenon extends beyond the quantum realm? Perhaps your observations of people, of situations, of life itself, are changing them in ways you cannot comprehend. The friend who acts differently when watched, the forest that feels different when you're alone, are these changes in them, or changes in you? Consider how your presence alters a conversation, how a crowd behaves differently when filmed. Is anything ever truly witnessed in its natural state, or does the very act of perception create a new reality? Like Schrödinger's famous cat, existing in multiple states until observation collapses all possibilities into one single outcome. This paradox whispers a troubling question. Have you ever seen the world as it truly is, or only as it appears when filtered through your consciousness? Perhaps reality itself is like a shy performer who changes the show when aware of an audience. The trees in the forest may dance differently when no one watches. The stars might shine with unfamiliar light when no eyes turn skyward. Your very thoughts about this paradox are changing it even now. As you contemplate these words, your mind is creating connections, building understanding, altering the concept itself. The observer and the observed are locked in an eternal dance, each continuously transforming the other. What dreams might reality have when no one is watching? What songs might the universe sing when no ears are listening? Perhaps consciousness itself is both the question and the answer, observing itself through your eyes, creating reality through the very act of experiencing it. As you ponder these questions, remember that even your understanding of this paradox changes it. Your awareness has weight and substance. Your attention bends reality around it like light around a star. You are not merely witnessing existence, you are participating in its continuous creation. The observer's paradox doesn't offer answers, only deeper questions. It suggests that reality is not fixed but fluid, not discovered but created in each moment of perception. What will you create with your observations tonight? What realities will form beneath your gaze? As your consciousness drifts through these thoughts, remember that the very act of wondering is itself changing the nature of what you wonder about. The non-existence paradox. What if nothing truly exists? This seemingly simple question unveils one of the most profound contradictions in philosophy, the non-existence paradox. If nothing exists, then that very nothingness must itself exist, immediately contradicting the premise. Tonight, we sink into this delicious contradiction that has bewildered thinkers for millennia. Close your eyes and try to imagine absolute nothingness. Not darkness, for darkness is something. Not emptiness, for emptiness is a concept that exists. Try to imagine the complete absence of everything: matter, energy, thought, concept, space, time. You'll quickly discover the impossibility of this task, for even in the void you create in your mind, something persists: your awareness of the void itself. True nothingness cannot be experienced or even conceptualized without destroying itself in the process. The moment you think about nothing, you've created something, a thought about nothing. The moment you try to describe nothingness, you've given it properties, making it something. This is the first layer of the paradox. Nothing cannot be nothing if it can be conceived. Consider the ancient philosophical question: why is there something rather than nothing? The very question assumes that nothingness is the simpler, more natural state. But what if nothingness is actually impossible? What if existence, in some form, is inevitable precisely because non-existence contradicts itself? Some philosophers have suggested that nothingness might be unstable. Perhaps a state of absolute nothing would spontaneously generate something, simply because the concept of perfect non-existence is self-contradictory. The void, they argue, would be pregnant with all possibilities, including the possibility of becoming something. This paradox extends to your own existence as well. Try to imagine your non-existence, not your death, which still involves a world continuing without you, but your complete absence from reality. You can't truly conceive it, because any conception requires your consciousness to exist in order to do the conceiving. Your non-existence is unimaginable to you, perhaps the ultimate proof that, for each of us, existence is inescapable from our own perspective. The paradox deepens when we consider negation itself. To negate something is to acknowledge it in the very act of denying it. When you say, "this does not exist," you've already brought this into the realm of concept, if not physical reality. Negation requires the existence of what is being negated, at least as an idea. This leads to a spinning contradiction. If nothing exists, then existence itself doesn't exist. But if existence doesn't exist, then non-existence must exist as a concept. And if non-existence exists, then something exists after all. The statement, "nothing exists," cannot be true without contradicting itself. Perhaps what we call nothing is merely a relative term, the absence of particular things, rather than the absence of everything. The empty space between stars isn't truly empty, but filled with energy and potential. The silence between notes in music isn't truly silent, but charged with anticipation. What if absence is merely presence we've yet to recognize? As your mind drifts through these contradictions tonight, remember that even your contemplation of non-existence affirms existence itself. The non-existence paradox doesn't offer answers, only the vertigo of self-reference and the wonder of being aware enough to contemplate your own awareness. In the dance between being and non-being, consciousness itself may be both the dancer and the dance. The time loop. Paradox. What if every ending is merely another beginning? What if time itself is not a line stretching from past to future, but a circle with no starting point? This is the essence of the time loop paradox, where cause and effect chase each other like serpents consuming their own tails. Imagine that you've been here before, reading these very words, feeling these very thoughts. Or perhaps you haven't, and the déjà vu you sometimes experience is merely time folding upon itself, whispering secrets of futures that have already passed, or that have yet to come, endless times over. Consider a traveler journeying backward through time to prevent a disaster. If they succeed, the disaster never occurs, which means they never had reason to travel back, which means the disaster happens after all. The loop continues, possibly forever, with no clear beginning or end. Each point is simultaneously cause and effect, creating and being created by the moments that surround it. This paradox emerges not just in thought experiments, but in our daily experience of time. The seasons cycle endlessly, civilizations rise and fall in patterns that seem to echo one another, and even our individual lives often seem to revisit the same themes and challenges in different forms. Perhaps these are not merely similarities, but manifestations of time's circular nature. If you could see your entire life at once, stretched out not as a line but as a loop, would you recognize yourself at different points along the circle? Would your future self seem as foreign to you as your past self sometimes does? The person you are now is simultaneously creating and being created by the person you will become. Your current choices echo backward through time, shaping the memories that formed your present self. The ancient Greeks conceived of time not as linear but cyclical. They believed that the same events would recur in the same sequence over vast epochs. Nietzsche later explored this as eternal recurrence, the idea that every moment of existence will repeat infinitely. If this were true, would it fill you with dread or with purpose? Would knowing that each moment will return endless times make you live differently? What if time itself is the ultimate illusion, not flowing like a river, but already complete, like a book whose pages exist all at once, though we can only read them one by one? Your experience of this moment might be a single frame in an eternal film that's already complete. The past, present, and future may coexist, with our consciousness merely traveling between them, creating the illusion of temporal progress. Perhaps memory and prediction are not merely mental functions, but glimpses across the loop of time. When you remember, you reach backward. When you anticipate, you reach forward. But if time is circular, are these really different directions at all, or merely different perspectives on the same eternal cycle? The time loop paradox offers no resolution, only the dizzying possibility that everything that has happened will happen again, that everything happening now has happened before. As your consciousness drifts through these circular thoughts tonight, remember that this moment of wondering may itself be part of an endless loop, recurring eternally in the vast cycle of existence. The non-existence paradox. What if nothing truly exists? This seemingly simple question unveils one of the most profound contradictions in philosophy, the non-existence paradox. If nothing exists, then that very nothingness must itself exist, immediately contradicting the premise. Tonight, we sink into this delicious contradiction that has bewildered thinkers for millennia. Close your eyes and try to imagine absolute nothingness. Not darkness, for darkness is something. Not emptiness, for emptiness is a concept that exists. Try to imagine the complete absence of everything: matter, energy, thought, concept, space, time. You'll quickly discover the impossibility of this task, for even in the void you create in your mind, something persists, your awareness of the void itself. True nothingness cannot be experienced or even conceptualized without destroying itself in the process. The moment you think about nothing, you've created something, a thought about nothing. The moment you try to describe nothingness, you've given it properties, making it something. This is the first layer of the paradox. Nothing cannot be nothing if it can be conceived. Consider the ancient philosophical question: why is there something rather than nothing? The very question assumes that nothingness is the simpler, more natural state. But what if nothingness is actually impossible? What if existence, in some form, is inevitable precisely because non-existence contradicts itself? Some philosophers have suggested that nothingness might be unstable. Perhaps a state of absolute nothing would spontaneously generate something, simply because the concept of perfect non-existence is self-contradictory. The void, they argue, would be pregnant with all possibilities, including the possibility of becoming something. This paradox extends to your own existence as well. Try to imagine your non-existence, not your death, which still involves a world continuing without you, but your complete absence from reality. You can't truly conceive it, because any conception requires your consciousness to exist in order to do the conceiving. Your non-existence is unimaginable to you, perhaps the ultimate proof that, for each of us, existence is inescapable from our own perspective. The paradox deepens when we consider negation itself. To negate something is to acknowledge it in the very act of denying it. When you say, "this does not exist," you've already brought this into the realm of concept, if not physical reality. Negation requires the existence of what is being negated, at least as an idea. This leads to a spinning contradiction. If nothing exists, then existence itself doesn't exist. But if existence doesn't exist, then non-existence must exist as a concept. And if non-existence exists, then something exists after all. The statement, "nothing exists," cannot be true without contradicting itself. Perhaps what we call nothing is merely a relative term, the absence of particular things, rather than the absence of everything. The empty space between stars isn't truly empty, but filled with energy and potential. The silence between notes in music isn't truly silent, but charged with anticipation. What if absence is merely presence we've yet to recognize? As your mind drifts through these contradictions tonight, remember that even your contemplation of non-existence affirms existence itself. The non-existence paradox doesn't offer answers, only the vertigo of self-reference and the wonder of being aware enough to contemplate your own awareness. In the dance between being and non-being, consciousness itself may be both the dancer and the dance, the reality contradiction. What if everything you perceive as real is merely an elaborate illusion? What if the solid ground beneath your feet, the thoughts in your mind, and even your sense of self are all constructs with no ultimate reality? This is the essence of the reality contradiction, the paradoxical notion that reality itself might be unreliable, inconsistent, or fundamentally unknowable. Imagine yourself sitting in a darkened theatre, watching shadows dance on a screen. How do you know that your own life isn't a similar projection? All you experience comes to you through your senses, which are limited and fallible. Colors exist only in your perception. The wavelengths of light are real, but the colors you see are created by your brain. Touch, taste, smell, all are interpretations of electrical signals, not direct experiences of the world. This paradox deepens when we consider that your brain itself, the interpreter of all these signals, is known to you only through those same signals. You've never directly experienced your own brain. You've seen images of brains, perhaps, or read descriptions, but your understanding of the very organ that creates your reality is itself a creation of that organ. If all you experience is filtered through your senses and interpreted by your mind, how can you be certain that anything exists beyond your perception? This is the question that haunted philosophers like Descartes, who found that the only thing he could know with absolute certainty was his own thinking. I think, therefore I am. But even this certainty extends only to your existence as a thinking entity, not to the nature of that existence or anything beyond it. Consider the contradictions within your own experience of reality. In dreams, you create entire worlds that feel completely real until you wake. How certain can you be that your waking life isn't simply another kind of dream? The line between imagination and perception is thinner than we like to admit. Memory, which forms the foundation of your sense of continuous existence, is notoriously unreliable, constantly being rewritten and reimagined. The reality contradiction suggests that what we call reality might be neither singular nor objective. Your reality and mine may differ in subtle but significant ways. The world as experienced by a bee, seeing ultraviolet patterns and sensing magnetic fields, is radically different from the human experience. Which version is real? Perhaps all of them are simultaneously real and incomplete. Science itself, our most rigorous method for investigating reality, has revealed fundamental contradictions at different scales. The physics that governs planets and stars breaks down at the quantum level, where particles can exist in multiple places simultaneously and affect each other instantly across vast distances. These contradictions suggest that reality, as we conceptualize it, may be merely a useful approximation, not an accurate representation of what actually exists. Some philosophers propose that consciousness itself might be fundamental to reality, that the material world emerges from mind rather than mind from matter. Others suggest that what we experience might be a simulation or a construction created by our brains to help us navigate a reality far stranger than we can directly perceive. The reality contradiction offers no resolution, only the dizzying possibility that everything you take for granted might be questionable. As your consciousness drifts through these unsettling thoughts tonight, remember that this uncertainty itself can be liberating. If reality is fluid rather than fixed, then perhaps you have more power than you realize to shape your experience of existence. What dreams might reality have when no one is watching? What songs might the universe sing when no ears are listening? Perhaps consciousness itself is both the questioner and the answer, creating reality through the very act of experiencing it, the thinking trap. What if the very tool you use to understand the world, your mind, is also what prevents you from seeing reality as it truly is? What if thinking itself is both the key to wisdom and the lock that keeps it just beyond reach? Tonight, we explore the paradoxes of thought, those curious contradictions that arise when consciousness bends back upon itself. As your mind contemplates these ideas, allow yourself to experience the strange freedom that comes with recognizing your own limitations. Consider first the observer effect. The act of measuring something inevitably changes what you're measuring. When you observe your own thoughts, they transform under your gaze, never appearing as they would had you not looked. Perhaps true understanding remains forever elusive, changing its nature the moment we attempt to grasp it. Is it possible that some truths can only be known by not trying to know them? Drifting deeper, we encounter the paradox of analysis. Breaking anything into components ultimately destroys the very thing you sought to understand. A rainbow dissected becomes merely frequencies of light, losing the magic that made it worth studying. Similarly, when we dissect our experiences into thoughts, feelings, and sensations, something essential seems to slip between our analytical fingers. What if some aspects of reality can only be understood as wholes, resisting our mind's tendency to divide and categorize? The map territory paradox beckons us further still. Every model of reality is a simplification, yet we often mistake our mental maps for the territories they represent. Scientists studying consciousness build models of the mind using the very mind they're attempting to explain. Like trying to see your own eyes without a mirror, the instrument of observation cannot fully observe itself. Could it be that complete self-understanding is impossible not because we lack intelligence, but because of the recursive nature of consciousness itself? As our journey concludes, consider that thinking about thinking creates an infinite regression, like mirrors facing each other. Each thought about a thought becomes itself an object for potential examination. Perhaps wisdom lies not in building more complex models of reality, but in occasionally setting aside the mapping impulse altogether. What if the deepest insights arrive not through analytical thinking, but in the spaces between thoughts, where the mind finally falls silent? As you drift towards sleep, consider that the paradoxes of thought need not be obstacles but invitations, gateways to a kind of understanding that transcends conventional thinking. Perhaps true wisdom begins with recognizing the limitations of thought itself, not as failure, but as the natural boundary of one mode of knowing, the self-awareness paradox. Have you ever caught yourself thinking about your own thoughts, creating an observer within the observer? What if self-awareness, our most human quality, contains at its core an unsolvable riddle? Tonight, we explore the paradoxes of self-awareness, those strange loops that form when consciousness becomes its own object. As we journey together, allow yourself to experience the vertigo that comes with looking inward, at the very thing doing the looking. The infinite regress first pulls us into its spiral. When you observe yourself, who is doing the observing? And who is observing that observer? Each level of awareness seems to require another watching eye, stretching infinitely inward like nested Russian dolls. Perhaps true self-knowledge forever eludes us, always one level of recursion beyond our reach. Is it possible that the self you seek to know is actually created through the very act of seeking? As we venture deeper, consider the blind spot of consciousness. Just as your eye cannot see its own retina without a mirror, perhaps your awareness cannot directly perceive its own nature. We experience the contents of consciousness, but never consciousness itself, like a flashlight that can illuminate anything except its own light. What if complete self-awareness is impossible, not because we lack insight, but because awareness itself cannot be made an object of awareness? The paradox of effort draws us further still. The harder you try to understand yourself, the more you alter what you're trying to understand. Attempting to catch your natural self through observation changes your behavior, like trying to watch yourself fall asleep. The very watching prevents what you hope to observe. Could it be that some aspects of self can only be known indirectly, through their effects, rather than through direct observation? As our exploration concludes, ponder the strange loop of identity. You are simultaneously the knower and the known, the subject and the object of your own awareness. This circularity defies our usual categories of understanding, creating a self-reference that cannot be untangled. What if you are not a thing to be known, but a process that knows? Not a noun, but a verb, a continuous activity rather than a fixed entity. As sleep approaches, consider that the paradoxes of self-awareness need not frustrate, but can liberate us from the impossible quest for complete self-knowledge. Perhaps wisdom lies not in solving these paradoxes, but in dancing with them, embracing the mystery at the heart of being human. The free will paradox. What if every choice you believe you make freely has been determined by causes beyond your awareness? What if free will itself is an illusion so convincing that questioning it feels like questioning your own existence? Tonight, we explore the paradoxes of choice and determination, those philosophical puzzles that arise when we examine the nature of our seemingly free decisions. As your mind contemplates these ideas, allow yourself to feel both the weight of causation and the lightness of possibility. Consider first the causal chain. Every thought and desire you experience arose from prior causes. Your genetics, upbringing, experiences, and current brain states. If these causes fully determine your choices, where is freedom to be found? Yet the experience of deliberation and choice feels undeniably real, as though multiple futures lie open before you. Is it possible that free will is neither an illusion nor a supernatural power, but something that emerges from complexity itself? Drifting deeper, we encounter the paradox of prediction. If your choices are truly free, they should be fundamentally unpredictable. Yet neuroscientists can increasingly predict decisions before you're conscious of making them. Perhaps what we experience as choice is actually the awareness of decisions already made beneath the surface of consciousness. What if the feeling of making a decision is actually the experience of becoming aware of a choice already determined? The knowledge paradox beckons us further still. If someone could know with perfect certainty what you will choose tomorrow, could you still choose differently? If yes, then they didn't truly know. If no, then where is your freedom? Perhaps freedom exists not in defying all prediction, but in the absence of external constraint, even if your choices flow inevitably from who you are. Could it be that true freedom isn't about escaping causation, but about becoming more fully yourself, allowing your actions to flow authentically from your deepest values? As our exploration concludes, consider that responsibility and determinism need not be enemies. Even in a fully determined universe, the notion of responsibility might remain useful, not as cosmic blame, but as recognition that your choices, determined though they may be, still shape future possibilities. What if the question isn't whether we have free will in some absolute sense, but how we might live meaningfully within whatever blend of freedom and determination constitutes our condition? As you drift towards sleep, consider that the paradoxes of free will need not be resolved but lived within. Perhaps wisdom lies not in settling metaphysical questions, but in cultivating awareness of the forces that shape our choices while still embracing the profound sense of agency that makes us human. The memory paradox. What if the past you remember never truly existed as you recall it? What if memory, our bridge to personal history, is actually a creative act performed anew each time we remember? Tonight we explore the paradoxes of memory, those curious contradictions that emerge when we examine how we know our own past. As we journey together, allow your certainty about your memories to soften, making space for the mystery of how we construct our personal histories. The reconstruction paradox first draws us into its labyrinth. Each time you remember something, you're not retrieving an intact recording, but rebuilding the memory from fragments, influenced by your current beliefs, emotions, and expectations. The very act of remembering alters the memory, like footsteps changing a path with each journey taken. Is it possible that your most cherished memories have been slowly transformed with each remembering, becoming less like history and more like historical fiction? As we venture deeper, consider the paradox of forgotten forgetting. You can remember forgetting something, but you cannot remember what you've truly forgotten. The absence leaves no trace. How many experiences, once significant, have disappeared so completely that you no longer know they're missing? Perhaps your sense of continuous identity is built upon a foundation far more fragmented than you realize. What if the story of your life that seems so solid is actually full of holes, gaps where memories once existed but have disappeared without a trace? the emotional intensity paradox beckons us further still. Why do emotionally charged memories feel more accurate when research shows they're often less reliable? Perhaps memory serves less to record the past with perfect fidelity and more to preserve lessons with emotional significance, prioritizing meaning over accuracy. Could it be that memory evolved not as a truth-recording device, but as a meaning-making system, helping us navigate the present and future, rather than perfectly preserving the past? As our exploration concludes, ponder the shared memory paradox. Memories validated by others feel more certain, yet studies of witnesses show how groups can reinforce false memories. Perhaps some of your most confident recollections exist not because they're accurate, but because they've been socially rehearsed and reinforced. What if many of your memories are actually stories you've told and retold until you can no longer distinguish between the event and the narrative you've created about it? As sleep approaches, consider that the paradoxes of memory need not undermine, but can enrich our understanding of ourselves. Perhaps wisdom lies not in treating memories as perfect recordings, but in recognizing their fluid, creative nature, appreciating how we continually rewrite our past as we move through the present toward the future. The identity paradox. Have you ever awakened from a dream so vivid that for a moment you weren't sure which reality was real? What if your sense of being a consistent self across time is similarly an illusion, a necessary fiction created moment by moment? Tonight, we explore the paradoxes of identity, those philosophical puzzles that emerge when we examine what makes you uniquely you. As your mind contemplates these ideas, allow your certainty about selfhood to soften, making space for questions that have no simple answers. Consider first the ship of Theseus. If every plank of a ship is gradually replaced until none of the original remains, is it still the same ship? Similarly, the atoms in your body are completely replaced every few years, your memories continually revised, your beliefs slowly transformed. What remains that makes you the same person you were a decade ago? Is it possible that continuity of identity is not found in unchanging substance, but in the pattern that persists through endless change? Drifting deeper, we encounter the paradox of fission. Imagine if your brain was split and each half placed in a different body, both awakening with your memories and personality. Which would be you? One? Both? Neither? Perhaps personal identity resists our attempts to define it precisely because it is not a thing but a process, not a noun, but a verb. What if the question, who am I, has no single answer, but is rather an invitation to a narrative that we continually create? The boundary problem beckons us further still. Where exactly do you end and the world begins? The oxygen molecules you breathe move constantly between you and not you. The bacteria in your gut are both foreign and essential to your existence. Even your thoughts are shaped by language and concepts invented by others. Perhaps the self is not contained within the boundaries of skin, but extends outward in ever-widening circles of connection. Could it be that you are not a separate entity, but a temporary pattern in the flow of existence, like a whirlpool in a river, distinct yet inseparable from the current that forms it? As our exploration concludes, consider that social identities further complicate the picture. You exist differently in the perception of each person who knows you, each holding a slightly different version of you in their understanding. Which, if any, is the real you? Perhaps you are not a single story, but a collection of narratives, co-created between yourself and everyone you encounter. What if personal identity is neither an illusion nor a fixed reality, but something more fluid and intersubjective, a dynamic process rather than a static thing? As you drift towards sleep, consider that the paradoxes of identity need not be resolved, but embraced. Perhaps wisdom lies not in discovering your true self, but in recognizing the wondrous, ever-changing nature of being, finding freedom in impermanence rather than seeking security in solidity. The sleep paradox. Have you ever wondered why we spend a third of our lives in a state of unconsciousness, temporarily surrendering the very awareness we so cherish? What if sleep, seemingly our most vulnerable state, is actually when our minds perform their most essential work? Tonight, we explore the paradoxes of sleep, those curious contradictions that emerge in the realm between consciousness and its absence. As your mind contemplates these mysteries, allow yourself to embrace the strangeness of this daily descent into altered awareness. Consider first the paradox of surrender, To sleep well, you must stop trying to sleep. The harder you attempt to force slumber, the more elusive it becomes. Perhaps sleep arrives not through effort, but through letting go, teaching us that some states can only be entered indirectly, like catching a butterfly by remaining perfectly still. Is it possible that our waking consciousness, with its illusion of control, sometimes prevents us from accessing deeper wisdom that only reveals itself when we surrender? Drifting deeper, we encounter the paradox of dreams. While physically paralyzed, we experience ourselves running, flying, speaking. Within dreams, the impossible becomes ordinary. Your dreaming brain creates entire worlds that feel absolutely real until you awaken. Perhaps the boundary between dreaming and waking reality is more permeable than we realize. What if our waking reality is itself a kind of consensus dream, a collective hallucination we've agreed to call real, simply because we experience it together? The paradox of unconscious processing beckons us further still. While conscious thought slows during sleep, your brain remains remarkably active, solving problems and consolidating memories with an intelligence that operates beyond your awareness. Some of our most creative insights arise not through deliberate analysis, but after a night of sleep, when the unconscious mind has worked its quiet magic. Could it be that our most sophisticated thinking happens precisely when we believe we aren't thinking at all? As our exploration concludes, consider the evolutionary paradox of sleep, a state that leaves creatures vulnerable to predators, yet has persisted throughout evolution. Every complex animal sleeps in some form, suggesting its function is so vital that the risk of predation is worth the reward. Perhaps consciousness itself requires regular intervals of absence to maintain its integrity. What if awareness, like a flame, would consume itself without the regular darkness that allows it to be replenished? As you drift towards sleep, consider that these paradoxes need not be fully resolved, but can be embraced as invitations to wonder. Perhaps in the rhythm between waking and sleeping, we encounter a fundamental truth about consciousness, that it flourishes not through constant presence, but through the delicate balance of appearance and disappearance, like the moon waxing and waning in the night sky. The imagination paradox. What if the worlds you create in your mind, places you've never been, people you've never met, are as consequential as the physical reality you inhabit? What if imagination, seemingly the realm of fantasy, is actually the hidden architect of all human achievement? Tonight, we explore the paradoxes of imagination, those curious contradictions that emerge when mind creates its own reality. As we journey together, allow the boundaries between inner and outer experience to soften, revealing the strange power of what exists only in thought. Consider first the reality paradox. Imagined experiences trigger genuine physical and emotional responses. Your heart races when you imagine danger, tears form when you envision loss, pleasure centers activate when you dream of joy. The body responds to what the mind creates as if it were encountering actual events. Perhaps the distinction between imagination and reality is less absolute than we believe. Is it possible that imagination is not an escape from reality, but an essential dimension of it, as real in its effects as anything we touch or see? Drifting deeper, we encounter the creativity paradox. Everything human-made first existed as imagination. The building you live in, the music you love, the technology you use, all began as someone's mental image before becoming physical reality. Yet we treat imagination as somehow less significant than the tangible world, despite its role as the source of everything we create. What if imagination is not secondary to physical reality, but primary, the wellspring from which all human creation flows? The empathy paradox beckons us further still. Through imagination, you can experience perspectives not your own, feel emotions for people who don't exist, and care deeply about fictional situations. This capacity to simulate other minds forms the foundation of human empathy and moral concern. Perhaps imagination is not a frivolous indulgence, but the very faculty that allows us to transcend self-interest. Could it be that our most noble qualities, compassion, justice, self-sacrifice, depend on this ability to imagine realities beyond our immediate experience? As our exploration concludes, consider the constraint paradox. Imagination seems boundless, yet it always builds from elements of what we've experienced. Even our wildest fantasies recombine aspects of reality rather than creating something truly ex nihilo. Perhaps imagination is neither completely free nor completely constrained, but exists in the fertile borderland between limitation and possibility. What if imagination's power comes not from unlimited freedom, but from its dance with constraints, like a poet finding greater expression through the structured form of a sonnet than through unstructured verse? As you drift towards sleep, consider that these paradoxes need not be resolved, but appreciated. Perhaps imagination is the bridge between what is and what could be, neither entirely separate from reality nor reducible to it, but the luminous space where possibility takes form before stepping into existence. The subconscious paradox. Have you ever had a solution appear in your mind, as if from nowhere, or found yourself humming a tune you didn't consciously choose? What if the thoughts you call your own actually arise from depths you cannot access, bubbling up from a vast reservoir of unconscious processing? Tonight, we explore the paradoxes of the subconscious mind, those curious contradictions that emerge when we consider what lies beneath awareness. As your thoughts drift with these ideas, allow yourself to wonder about the hidden currents that shape your conscious experience. Consider first the authorship paradox. You experience thoughts as if you're creating them, yet they often appear fully formed in consciousness. Like a fisherman catching fish rather than making them, perhaps you're receiving thoughts rather than generating them. The subconscious mind processes information and solves problems without your awareness, presenting only the finished results to consciousness. Is it possible that what you call thinking is actually the act of noticing thoughts that have already been formed below the threshold of awareness? Drifting deeper, we encounter the knowledge paradox. You know how to balance on a bicycle or recognize a familiar face without being able to explain how you do it. This procedural knowledge operates through unconscious processes that conscious analysis can actually disrupt. Perhaps some forms of intelligence function better precisely because they remain inaccessible to conscious scrutiny. What if certain kinds of understanding can only operate effectively when they remain beneath the surface of awareness, like roots that nourish a tree while remaining unseen? The emotional wisdom paradox beckons us further still. Your gut feelings often register threats or opportunities before conscious reasoning can identify them, drawing on patterns recognized unconsciously. These intuitions sometimes prove wiser than deliberate analysis, especially in complex situations. Perhaps the subconscious mind processes information in ways that conscious reasoning cannot match. Could it be that wisdom sometimes arrives not through careful deliberation, but through allowing the deeper mind to speak through feelings and intuitions? As our exploration concludes, consider the paradox of self-improvement. To change yourself, you must somehow use the mind to reshape itself, like trying to repair a tool using the very tool you wish to fix. Yet through practices like meditation or therapy, people access and alter unconscious patterns. Perhaps the relationship between conscious intention and unconscious processing is not one-directional, but reciprocal. What if consciousness and subconsciousness are not separate realms, but different modes of the same mind, each influencing the other in an endless conversation? As you drift towards sleep, consider that these paradoxes need not frustrate, but can illuminate. Perhaps true self-knowledge comes not from trying to shine the spotlight of consciousness into every corner of the mind, but from learning to listen to the whispers that rise from the depths, carrying messages from parts of yourself that think in ways beyond words. The thought-existence paradox. What if your thoughts are not simply representations of reality, but actual things in themselves? What if the boundaries between thinking and being are far more permeable than we typically assume? Tonight, we explore the paradoxes of thought existence, those curious contradictions that emerge when we consider the reality status of our mental contents. As your mind contemplates these mysteries, allow yourself to question the very nature of what it means for something to exist. Consider first the reality paradox. Thoughts create measurable changes in your brain and body. A fearful thought triggers stress hormones. A loving thought releases oxytocin. An embarrassing memory makes you blush. In this physiological sense, thoughts are as real as any external stimulus. Perhaps the distinction between mental and physical events is less absolute than we believe. Is it possible that thoughts exist not merely as ephemeral shadows, but as events with genuine causal power in the physical world? Drifting deeper, we encounter the creation paradox. When you imagine a character or story, you bring something into existence that wasn't there before. This creation can affect others emotionally, inspire action, and leave lasting impressions. Yet we treat these mental creations as somehow less real than physical objects. Perhaps existence itself comes in degrees rather than absolute categories. What if reality is not binary but a spectrum, with different kinds of existence having different properties but equal claim to being real? The shared thought paradox beckons us further still. Ideas can spread from mind to mind, existing across multiple consciousnesses rather than belonging to any single brain. Concepts like democracy, infinity, or justice exist not as physical objects, but as patterns replicated across countless minds. Perhaps some types of existence are social rather than individual or material. Could it be that certain realities exist primarily in the intersubjective space between minds, rather than within any single consciousness or in the physical world? As our exploration concludes, consider the paradox of mathematical existence. Mathematical objects like perfect circles or infinite sequences cannot be physically instantiated, yet seem to have properties we discover rather than invent. Mathematicians speak of finding rather than creating proofs, as though these abstract entities somehow exist independently of human thought. Perhaps some realities transcend both the physical and the mental. What if certain truths exist necessarily, independent of whether anyone thinks them, while simultaneously being accessible only through thought? As you drift towards sleep, consider that these paradoxes need not be resolved through reduction, but embraced in their multiplicity. Perhaps wisdom lies not in deciding which forms of existence are really real, but in recognizing the rich tapestry of realities we inhabit simultaneously, the physical, the mental, the social, and perhaps others we have yet to fully comprehend. The ego paradox. What if the very self you believe to be most real is merely an illusion created by your mind? What if the I that you identify with so strongly is actually the greatest fiction you've ever encountered? Tonight, we drift into the mysterious realm of the ego paradox, where the boundary between self and non-self dissolves like mist in morning light. This isn't merely an intellectual exercise, it's a doorway into questioning the very foundation of your existence. Imagine yourself sitting quietly, attempting to locate yourself. Where exactly does it reside? Is it in your body, your thoughts, your memories? As you search, you discover something remarkable. The harder you try to grasp your essential self, the more it seems to slip away like water through open fingers. The paradox emerges. The ego that searches for itself cannot find itself, for the seeker cannot be the sought. The I cannot see itself seeing. The thinker cannot think itself thinking without creating an infinite regression of observers. Who is watching the watcher who watches the self? Consider how your sense of identity shifts across time. The you of childhood shares little with the you of today beyond a continuous thread of memory, yet you insist both are the same person. But memories can be false, implanted, or forgotten. If you woke tomorrow with amnesia, would you still be the same person? If not, then what exactly is this self that you cherish? This paradox deepens when we examine consciousness itself. The ego claims ownership of thoughts, yet when observed carefully, thoughts appear in consciousness unbidden, arising from nowhere. You don't choose what to think next. Thoughts simply appear. So who is thinking? Who is the I that claims to be the thinker when thinking happens on its own? Ancient wisdom traditions recognized this paradox thousands of years ago. The Buddha spoke of anatta, or no self, suggesting that what we call the self is merely a collection of processes with no central controller. Meditation traditions worldwide invite practitioners to look for the self, only to discover its elusive, perhaps illusory nature. Modern neuroscience echoes this ancient insight. The brain appears to construct the sense of self through multiple neural networks working in harmony. There is no single self-center in the brain, no homunculus sitting at a control panel. Instead, the experience of being someone emerges from countless processes working together. The ego is less a thing and more a process, not a noun, but a verb. Yet paradoxically, this illusory self feels absolutely real to us. It is the most intimate aspect of our experience, the lens through which we view everything else. How can something so fundamental to our experience also be a construction? How can the most certain thing in our lives, our own existence as a distinct self, be questionable? Perhaps the self is like a whirlpool in a river, a pattern rather than a thing. The water molecules constantly change, yet the pattern persists. Or perhaps it's like a story that we tell ourselves so consistently that we forget it's a narrative rather than a reality. The ego paradox doesn't offer simple answers, only deepening questions. It suggests that what we call I might be neither solid nor singular, but a fluid process that creates the very sense of solidity and singularity that we experience. As your consciousness drifts through these thoughts tonight, remember that the very act of questioning yourself is being performed by the self you question, perhaps the ultimate paradox of human existence. The grandfather paradox. What happens if you travel back in time and prevent your own grandfather from meeting your grandmother? If you succeed, you would never have been born, which means you could never have traveled back in time in the first place. Yet, if you never traveled back, you wouldn't have prevented the meeting, which means you would be born and could travel back after all. This infinite loop of causality is the essence of the grandfather paradox. Imagine yourself stepping through a portal into the past, walking the same streets your grandfather once walked. You see him there, younger than you've ever known him, perhaps even younger than you are now. With a simple action, distracting him at a crucial moment, sending him down a different street, you ensure he never meets the woman who will become your grandmother. The paradox emerges instantly. If your intervention succeeds, you erase your own existence. If you were never born, you could never have traveled back to intervene. But if you didn't intervene, then you would be born after all, allowing you to go back and intervene. Each possibility negates itself in an endless cycle that reason cannot resolve. This paradox has fascinated philosophers, physicists, and science fiction authors for decades because it highlights profound questions about causality and the nature of time itself. Is time immutable, rigid in its progression? Or is it fluid, adaptable to changes in its own fabric? Some theorists propose that the paradox resolves itself through the creation of alternate timelines. Your intervention doesn't change your own past, but creates a new branch of reality, one where your grandfather never meets your grandmother, and you are never born. Meanwhile, the timeline you came from continues to exist separately. This many worlds approach suggests that time might be less like a single river and more like an infinitely branching delta. Others suggest that the universe might have built-in protection mechanisms, sometimes called chronology protection conjecture, that would prevent such paradoxes from occurring. Perhaps attempts to change the past would be subtly thwarted by seemingly coincidental events. Your attempt to prevent your grandfather's crucial meeting might actually be the very thing that causes it to happen. The paradox deepens when we consider the nature of free will in a deterministic universe. If time travel were possible, could you actually choose to kill your grandfather, knowing it would prevent your own existence? Or would something in the fabric of reality, or in your own psychology, prevent you from making that choice? Does causality constrain not just what can happen, but what we can choose to do? Consider how this paradox applies beyond literal time travel. We are all, in a sense, time travelers moving inexorably into the future, changing the conditions that will create our future selves. Every choice you make alters who you will become. Are there choices you could make today that would create a future self who wouldn't or couldn't make those same choices? Does this create a smaller scale version of the same paradox? Some physicists believe that time might not be as linear as we experience it. If past, present, and future exist simultaneously, what Einstein called the block universe, then causality as we understand it might be merely a perspective rather than an absolute truth. In such a universe, paradoxes might dissolve entirely, as all moments exist on equal footing, none truly causing another. The grandfather paradox offers no simple resolution, only the vertigo of circular causality. It suggests that time might be far stranger than our everyday experience suggests, less like an arrow and more like a Mobius strip, with no clear beginning or end. As your mind drifts through these temporal loops tonight, remember that even the act of contemplating such paradoxes shapes who you will become in your own journey through time. The bootstrap paradox. Where does an object come from if it's never actually created? This is the essence of the bootstrap paradox, a temporal riddle that asks us to consider information or objects trapped in a causal loop, with no discernible origin point. It's as if reality pulls itself up by its own bootstraps, creating something from nothing through the circular nature of time. Imagine finding an old, weathered book on your shelf, a book you don't recall acquiring. Inside, you discover incredible ideas that change your life. Years later, you travel back in time, and knowing how important this book will be to your past self, you place it on your younger self's bookshelf. The younger you finds it, is inspired by it, and eventually travels back to place it on the shelf. The paradox emerges. Who wrote the book? It wasn't created by you or anyone else. It simply exists in a closed time loop, with no point of original creation. The information within the book came from nowhere and was created by no one. It exists only because it exists. This paradox takes its name from the impossible notion of pulling oneself up by one's own bootstraps, creating lift without an external force. In a temporal bootstrap paradox, creation occurs without a creator, effect without original cause. The loop itself becomes both cause and effect simultaneously. Consider how this paradox might apply to ideas and inspiration. A musician from the present travels to the past and performs a song that inspires a young artist, who grows up to become the very musician who traveled back in time. Who composed the song? The melody exists in a closed loop of inspiration, with no original moment of creation. The bootstrap paradox challenges our understanding of causality at its core. We're accustomed to thinking of causes preceding effects in a linear progression. But in a closed time loop, this distinction collapses. Everything is simultaneously causing and being caused by everything else in the loop, in an eternal circularity that defies our normal understanding of how reality works. Some philosophers suggest that information itself might be different from physical objects in terms of causal requirements. While matter and energy cannot be created or destroyed, according to physical law, perhaps information doesn't require the same kind of conservation. Information might be able to exist in causal loops in ways that physical objects cannot. Others propose that these paradoxes might be resolved through the concept of consistent time travel, the idea that any journey through time must be consistent with the timeline as a whole. In this view, you were always going to travel back and place the book on the shelf, because that's how history always unfolded. The past doesn't change. It includes your future actions as part of what always happened. The paradox deepens when we consider consciousness and free will. If you know that history requires you to place the book on the shelf to maintain the timeline's consistency, do you truly have a choice in the matter? Or are you merely fulfilling a role in a predetermined sequence with the illusion of choice? Perhaps reality itself contains bootstrap elements, aspects of existence that cause themselves in circular patterns of creation. Some cosmologists have proposed models of the universe where the future somehow causes the past, creating the conditions for its own existence in an enormous cosmic bootstrap paradox. This paradox offers no resolution, only the mind-bending possibility that causality itself might not be as straightforward as we assume. As your consciousness drifts through these circular thoughts tonight, consider that your very contemplation of this paradox might be part of some larger loop of ideas, flowing through time in patterns we can barely comprehend. Zeno's paradox. How can you ever reach your destination if you must first travel half the distance, then half of what remains, then half again, continuing infinitely? This is the essence of Zeno's paradox, an ancient riddle that reveals the mysterious relationship between infinity and finite reality. Imagine yourself walking toward a doorway. Before you reach it, you must first reach the halfway point. Before you reach that halfway point, you must reach the quarter-way point. Before that, the eighth-way point. This division continues infinitely. There are always smaller fractions of the journey to complete before you can complete the whole. Since there are infinite points to traverse, and you cannot traverse an infinite number of points in finite time, motion itself should be impossible. Yet you walk through doorways every day. This contradiction between logical impossibility and everyday experience is what makes Zeno's paradox so enduring and profound. The ancient Greek philosopher Zeno of Elea created several variations of this paradox around 450 BCE, challenges to our understanding of space, time, and motion that remain thought-provoking even today. The most famous version involves Achilles racing a tortoise. The tortoise is given a head start, and Zeno argues that Achilles can never catch up. By the time Achilles reaches the tortoise's starting point, the tortoise has moved forward. By the time Achilles reaches that new position, the tortoise has moved again. Each time Achilles arrives at where the tortoise was, the tortoise has moved ahead. Since there are infinite points at which the tortoise is ahead, Achilles should never be able to overtake it. Of course, in reality, Achilles would easily pass the tortoise. The paradox lies not in the physical world, but in how we conceptualize space and time. It reveals the tension between our discrete, step-by-step logical thinking and the apparently continuous nature of physical reality. Modern mathematics resolves this paradox through the concept of convergent series. While it's true that you must complete an infinite number of ever smaller steps to reach your destination, the total time required for these steps is finite. The infinite sum 1/2 plus 1/4 plus 1/8 plus 1/16 plus dot converges to exactly one point. Infinity, it seems, can be contained within the finite. But this mathematical resolution doesn't completely dispel the philosophical mystery. How can reality accommodate both the continuous and the discrete? Is space infinitely divisible, or is there a smallest possible distance? Is time continuous, or does it come in indivisible units? Modern physics suggests that at the quantum scale, both space and time might indeed have minimum units, a finding that Zeno might have found vindication in. The paradox takes on new dimensions when we consider perception and consciousness. Our experience of motion is continuous, yet our perception operates through discrete neural firings. We perceive continuous movement despite processing information in distinct chunks. Perhaps our consciousness creates continuity from discrete elements, just as film creates the illusion of continuous motion from a series of still frames. Consider how this paradox applies to achievement and progress. Any significant journey can be divided into seemingly infinite steps. If you focus too much on these divisions, all the individual actions required to write a novel, build a career, or master a skill, the task might seem impossible. Yet people complete these infinite journeys regularly by experiencing them as continuous progress rather than discrete steps. Zeno's paradox has implications for how we understand change itself. If any change requires traversing infinite intermediate states, how does anything ever truly transform? Perhaps change, like motion, is both impossible, logically, and inevitable, experientially, another fundamental paradox of existence. As your consciousness drifts through these ancient questions tonight, remember that you navigate this paradox with every movement you make. Your mind and body somehow bridge the gap between infinite division and finite action, between the logical impossibility of motion and its everyday reality. In this contradiction lies one of the deepest mysteries of existence, how the infinite and the finite dance together in every moment of our lives. The future past. Paradox. What if the future influences the past as much as the past shapes the future? This is the essence of the future-past paradox, a mind-bending possibility where causality flows not just forward, but backward through time, creating circular patterns of influence that have no clear beginning or end. Imagine receiving a mysterious message that helps you solve a crucial problem. Years later, you discover a method to send messages backward through time. Remembering how important that message was to your past self, you send the exact same information back, becoming the source of the very message that helped you. The solution didn't come from your future self or your past self, but exists in a loop where each version of you both receives and creates it. This paradox emerges from certain interpretations of quantum physics, particularly the delayed choice quantum eraser experiments. These suggest that measurements made in the present can apparently influence the behavior of particles in the past. Particles seem to know what measurements will be made on them before those decisions are actually made, as if information flows backward in time. Some physicists propose that quantum particles might exist in a state where past and future are entangled, where what happens later affects what happened earlier just as much as the reverse. In this view, causality becomes bidirectional rather than linear, flowing in both temporal directions simultaneously. Consider how this paradox might apply to human intention and action. You decide to become a musician because you envision your future self performing on stage. This future vision, which doesn't yet exist, causes your present actions, which then create that future. Did the future cause the past, or did the past cause the future? Both seem true simultaneously, creating a causal loop with no clear origin point. The paradox deepens when we consider human knowledge and discovery. Did Pythagoras discover his famous theorem? Or did the theorem, existing eternally in the realm of mathematical truth, somehow call to him across time? Did Einstein discover relativity, or was he drawn toward it by its future importance? Perhaps great ideas exist in a timeless space, influencing the past from the future to ensure their own discovery. Some philosophical traditions embrace this circular causality. Ancient concepts of fate and destiny suggest that future events somehow reach back through time to ensure their own occurrence. Modern concepts like teleology, the idea that processes are drawn toward future purposes, similarly suggest that the future might exert a kind of pull on the present. Biological systems sometimes appear to operate with this bidirectional causality. A developing embryo seems to unfold according to a future plan, as if the completed organism somehow influences its own development process. The DNA contains information about the future state, but how does this static code translate into the dynamic process of development without some sense of where it's heading? Perhaps consciousness itself operates partly through future-past loops. When you set an intention to wake at a specific time, and then do so without an alarm, has your future awakening somehow influenced your sleeping mind? When you reach for a glass of water, does your intention, the future state of holding the glass, somehow reach backward to organize the complex motor movements required? Some spiritual traditions suggest that what we call inspiration or intuition might be information flowing backward from future states of knowledge. The sense of being called toward a particular life path might be your future self reaching back to guide your present choices. Divine guidance, in this view, could be interpreted as influence from states of consciousness that exist outside linear time altogether. The future-past paradox offers no resolution, only the dizzying possibility that reality might be organized in temporal loops rather than straight lines. As your consciousness drifts through these circular thoughts tonight, consider that the very ideas taking shape in your mind might be influenced by their future significance, thoughts thinking themselves into existence through the mysterious marriage of what has been and what will be. The relativity paradox. What if the flow of time you experience as constant and universal is actually fluid and personal? What if the very fabric of reality bends and stretches depending on how you move through it? Tonight, we explore the paradoxes of relativity, those curious contradictions that emerge when we examine the nature of space and time. As your mind contemplates these mysteries, allow yourself to release the certainty that your experience of reality is absolute. Consider first the twin paradox. Imagine two identical siblings, one remaining on Earth, while the other journeys through space at nearly the speed of light. Upon returning, the traveler has aged mere months, while the earthbound twin has lived decades. Both have experienced time correctly, yet differently. Perhaps time is not an absolute river carrying us all at the same rate, but a phenomenon uniquely experienced by each observer. Is it possible that your perception of now is merely one perspective among infinite possibilities, no more absolute than your perception of here? Drifting deeper, we encounter the paradox of simultaneity. Events that appear to happen at the same moment to one observer may occur at different times to another, depending on their relative motion. The very concept of "at the same time" loses its universal meaning. Perhaps the universe refuses to be synchronized by a single cosmic clock, instead offering a multitude of equally valid temporal perspectives. What if your sense of time's orderly progression is merely a local phenomenon, a convenient illusion that breaks down when we step beyond our limited frame of reference? The length-contraction paradox beckons us further still. Objects in motion appear shorter along their direction of travel when viewed by a stationary observer, yet from their own perspective, they remain unchanged. Both perspectives are equally valid, despite their contradiction. Perhaps reality itself refuses to be pinned down to a single definitive state, preferring instead to exist as a web of relationships. Could it be that the objective world so central to our understanding is actually a fluid tapestry of subjective perspectives, none having claim to absolute truth? As our exploration concludes, consider that light, which carries the very information we use to perceive the world, experiences no time at all. From a photon's perspective, its journey across billions of light years happens instantaneously. Perhaps the universe as experienced by light reveals something profound about reality that our time-bound consciousness can only glimpse. What if the passing of time itself is not a fundamental aspect of reality, but an artifact of our particular way of moving through existence. As you drift towards sleep, consider that these paradoxes need not disturb, but can liberate us from rigid thinking. Perhaps wisdom lies not in seeking absolute frames of reference, but in recognizing that reality emerges from the dance of perspectives, each valid, each limited, and each revealing one facet of a truth too multidimensional for any single viewpoint to fully comprehend. The instant travel paradox. Have you ever gazed at distant stars and wondered what it would mean to traverse such vast distances in the blink of an eye? What if instant travel across space is not merely a fantasy, but a concept that reveals profound contradictions in our understanding of reality? Tonight, we explore the paradoxes of instant travel, those curious contradictions that emerge when we contemplate moving without traversing the space between. As your thoughts drift with these ideas, allow yourself to question whether space itself is as absolute as it seems. Consider first the simultaneity paradox. If you could instantly transport yourself across the galaxy, you would also travel in time according to relativity. Events simultaneous from one location are not simultaneous from another, meaning instant travel would require navigating not just space, but time. Perhaps space and time are not separate dimensions, but aspects of a single fabric that resists our attempts to move through one without affecting the other. Is it possible that our deepest intuitions about here and there, now and then, break down at the fundamental level of reality? Drifting deeper, we encounter the quantum teleportation paradox. While quantum information can be transported without traversing the intervening space, it requires both quantum entanglement and classical communication, limited by light speed. The universe seems to permit a kind of instant connection, while simultaneously preventing it from carrying usable information faster than light. Perhaps reality enforces its speed limit through subtle means that only become apparent at the boundaries of possibility. What if instant travel reveals not just technological barriers, but conceptual contradictions that hint at deeper principles underlying the cosmos? The wormhole paradox beckons us further still. Theoretical physics suggests space-time might fold back upon itself, creating shortcuts through the universe. Yet these same equations suggest that traversable wormholes would require exotic matter with negative energy, something that may not exist in sufficient quantities. Perhaps the universe tantalizingly suggests possibilities that it simultaneously renders unattainable. Could it be that the very laws that make reality comprehensible also place intrinsic limits on what conscious beings can experience within that reality? As our exploration concludes, consider the paradox of arrival. If you could travel anywhere instantly, the concept of distance would lose meaning. The cosmos would become effectively small, despite its vastness. Our entire sense of scale and proportion, so fundamental to how we perceive reality, would be upended. Perhaps our understanding of space is inseparable from the time required to traverse it. What if our deepest intuitions about reality are shaped not by how the universe fundamentally is, but by the particular limitations of beings who move slowly through space-time? As you drift towards sleep, consider that these paradoxes need not be mere puzzles, but windows into the nature of existence. Perhaps wisdom lies not in resolving these contradictions, but in allowing them to reshape our understanding of what it means to exist in a universe where space, time, and consciousness intertwine in ways that exceed our everyday experience. The parallel universe. Paradox. What if every decision you've ever made created not just one outcome, but split reality itself, generating countless parallel versions of you living out every possibility? What if the universe is not singular, but exists as an infinite collection of alternate realities? Tonight, we explore the paradoxes of parallel universes, those curious contradictions that emerge when we contemplate the multiplicity of existence. As your mind wanders through these possibilities, allow yourself to question whether reality is as unified as it appears. Consider first the probability paradox. Quantum physics suggests particles exist in multiple states simultaneously until measured, collapsing into one definite state. Some interpretations propose that all possibilities occur in different branches of reality. If true, somewhere there exists a version of you who made every possible choice at every decision point. Perhaps the apparent randomness of quantum events is actually a glimpse of infinite realities brushing against each other. Is it possible that what we perceive as chance is actually the shadow of alternate versions of ourselves, making different choices in parallel existences. Drifting deeper, we encounter the identity paradox. If countless versions of you exist, experiencing every possible variation of your life, which one is the real you? The you who became an artist rather than a scientist, who moved to Paris instead of staying home, who spoke the words you left unsaid. Perhaps identity itself is not singular, but exists as a spectrum of possibilities, partially realized in countless variations. What if the boundary that seems to separate you from what might have been is more permeable than we imagine, with aspects of all possible selves somehow contributing to who you are? The communication paradox beckons us further still. If parallel universes exist, why can't we detect or communicate with them? These other realities would contain versions of ourselves potentially trying to reach across the divide. Perhaps the very mechanisms that allow multiple realities to coexist also ensure their separation, like adjacent rooms with soundproof walls. Could it be that we occasionally receive faint signals from these alternate realities, experiencing them as déjà vu, inexplicable intuitions, or dreams of lives we've never lived? As our exploration concludes, consider the meaning paradox. If every possible choice is actualized in some reality, does any single choice matter? Yet from within each timeline, the choices feel significant and real. Perhaps meaning exists not in the uniqueness of any particular path, but in the subjective experience of traveling it, regardless of parallel journeys occurring elsewhere. What if the value of your choices lies not in their cosmic uniqueness, but in your conscious experience of making them, even if alternate versions of you make different choices in worlds you'll never know? As you drift towards sleep, consider that these paradoxes need not diminish, but might enhance our appreciation of existence. Perhaps wisdom lies in recognizing that reality may be vaster and more varied than we comprehend, while still honoring the profound significance of the particular journey that constitutes your experience of being. The time dilation paradox. Have you ever wondered why time seems to slow when you're bored, yet races when you're engaged? What if this subjective experience hints at a deeper truth, that time itself is not absolute but relative, stretching and compressing depending on how you move through space? Tonight, we explore the paradoxes of time dilation, those curious contradictions that emerge when we examine how time flows differently for different observers. As your mind contemplates these mysteries, allow yourself to question whether the steady tick of seconds is as universal as it seems. Consider first the velocity paradox. The faster you move through space, the slower you move through time. A clock on a spacecraft traveling near light speed would tick noticeably slower than an identical clock on Earth. Yet from the spacecraft's perspective, it's the Earth's clock that runs slow. Both perspectives are equally valid, despite their contradiction. Perhaps time is not an absolute framework, but a relative experience, unique to each observer's reference frame. Is it possible that what you experience as the steady flow of time is merely your particular perspective on a dimension that's experienced differently by others moving relative to you? Drifting deeper, we encounter the gravitational paradox. Time passes more slowly in stronger gravitational fields. A clock at sea level ticks minutely slower than one on a mountaintop. A clock near a black hole might tick decades slower than one in deep space. Perhaps time is not merely affected by motion, but is fundamentally intertwined with the warping of space itself around massive objects. What if what we call gravity and what we call time are actually different aspects of a single phenomenon, the curvature of space-time in the presence of mass and energy? The age paradox beckons us further still. If you could travel close to light speed for what your ship's clock measured as 1 year, you might return to find decades had passed on Earth. You would be younger than your descendants. Both your age and Earth's passage of time would be equally real, equally valid measures of duration. Perhaps aging itself is not an absolute process, but one relative to your path through space-time. Could it be that what we perceive as the inevitable forward flow of time is actually just one way of experiencing a dimension that's far more complex and varied than our everyday experience suggests? As our exploration concludes, consider the present moment paradox. Events that appear simultaneous to one observer may occur at different times to another. The very concept of now loses its universal meaning, becoming instead a relative slice through space-time that differs depending on the observer's motion. Perhaps the present moment is not an absolute reality, but a perspective unique to each observer's position and velocity. What if the universe lacks a universal present moment, offering instead billions of equally valid nows that slice through the fabric of space-time at different angles? As you drift towards sleep, consider that these paradoxes need not confuse, but can liberate us from limited thinking. Perhaps wisdom lies in recognizing that time, so central to human experience, may be more mysterious and malleable than our everyday experience suggests, a dimension we move through rather than a force that moves through us. The infinity paradox. What if the concept that stretches your mind to its limits, infinity, contains within it paradoxes that challenge the very foundations of mathematics and logic? What if the endless, the boundless, when examined closely, reveals contradictions that no finite mind can fully resolve? Tonight, we explore the paradoxes of infinity, those curious contradictions that emerge when we contemplate the concept of endlessness. As your thoughts drift with these ideas, allow yourself to experience the vertigo that comes with peering into conceptual abysses. Consider first Hilbert's hotel paradox. Imagine a hotel with infinitely many rooms, all occupied. Surprisingly, it can still accommodate new guests simply by moving each current guest to the room numbered one higher, freeing room 1. Even more remarkably, it could accommodate infinitely many new guests through similar rearrangements. Perhaps our intuitions about capacity and fullness break down when applied to the infinite. Is it possible that infinity isn't merely very large, but represents a fundamentally different kind of quantity that operates by its own special logic? Drifting deeper, we encounter the part-whole paradox. Some infinite sets contain others as proper subsets, yet both are the same size. The set of all integers contains the set of even integers as a proper subset, yet both sets can be placed in one-to-one correspondence, making them the same size by the standard definition. Perhaps our notions of larger and smaller require reconceptualization when applied to infinite collections. What if our most basic intuitions about size and containment are merely artifacts of our experience with finite objects, falling apart when extended to the infinite? The supertask paradox beckons us further still. Imagine completing an infinite sequence of tasks in finite time by performing each successive task in half the time of the previous one. After 2 minutes, you would have completed infinitely many actions. Yet how can a finite period contain an infinite sequence? Perhaps the very concept of completion changes its nature when applied to endless processes. Could it be that infinity reveals limitations not just in our thinking, but in the concepts of completion and totality themselves? As our exploration concludes, consider Cantor's paradox. The collection of all sets cannot itself be a set without contradiction, as it would have to contain itself and yet be larger than itself. Perhaps infinity, when pushed to its logical extremes, reveals boundaries in our conceptual frameworks, rather than just in our cognitive capacities. What if certain paradoxes of infinity aren't puzzles awaiting resolution, but windows into the limitations of formal systems themselves, including mathematics and logic? As you drift towards sleep, consider that these paradoxes need not frustrate, but can humble and inspire us. Perhaps wisdom lies not in conquering infinity with understanding, but in recognizing how it reveals the beautiful limitations of minds evolved in a finite world, reaching toward concepts that exceed their grasp, yet somehow remain accessible to contemplation. The fate versus free will paradox. Have you ever made a decision and wondered if it was truly your choice, or merely the inevitable outcome of all that came before? What if both perspectives, that your choices are determined and that they are free, contain elements of truth that cannot be fully reconciled? Tonight, we explore the paradoxes of fate and free will, those curious contradictions that emerge when we examine the nature of choice itself. As your mind contemplates these mysteries, allow yourself to feel both the weight of causation and the lightness of possibility. Consider first the causal chain paradox. Every decision you make arises from your desires, beliefs, and character, which themselves were shaped by prior experiences, genetics, and environmental factors stretching back before your birth. If these causes fully determine your choices, where is freedom to be found? Yet the experience of deliberation and choice feels undeniably real, as though multiple futures genuinely lie open before you. Is it possible that free will is neither an illusion nor a supernatural power, but something that emerges from complexity itself, like consciousness arising from neurons that individually possess no awareness? Drifting deeper, we encounter the prediction paradox. If someone could predict with perfect accuracy what you will choose tomorrow, could you still choose differently? If yes, then they didn't truly predict. If no, then where is your freedom? Perhaps freedom exists not in defying prediction, but in the absence of external constraint, even if your choices flow inevitably from who you are. What if true freedom isn't about escaping causation, but about becoming more fully yourself, allowing your actions to flow authentically from your deepest values rather than from external coercion? The moral responsibility paradox beckons us further still. If your actions are the inevitable result of causes beyond your control, how can you be held accountable for them? Yet without some concept of responsibility, social cooperation becomes impossible. Perhaps responsibility is not about metaphysical desert, but about practical necessity, acknowledging that your choices, determined though they may be, shape future possibilities. Could it be that we are simultaneously fully caused and fully responsible, not because these concepts are logically compatible in the abstract, but because both are necessary aspects of human experience? As our exploration concludes, consider the quantum indeterminacy paradox. At the smallest scales, nature appears fundamentally probabilistic rather than deterministic. Yet even if the physical world contains genuine randomness, mere chance seems no more supportive of meaningful freedom than rigid determinism. Perhaps free will exists neither in determinism nor randomness, but in the conscious navigation of possibilities, however those possibilities arise. What if the question isn't whether we have free will in some absolute sense, but how we might live meaningfully within whatever blend of freedom and determination constitutes our condition? As you drift towards sleep, consider that these paradoxes need not be resolved, but lived within. Perhaps wisdom lies not in settling metaphysical questions, but in cultivating awareness of the forces that shape our choices, while still embracing the profound sense of agency that makes us human, navigating the territory between fate and freedom with grace and intention. The ship of Theseus. What if your very identity is as fluid as water, constantly changing while appearing to remain the same? What if the you that exists in this moment is fundamentally different from the you of your childhood, yet somehow still the same being? Tonight, we drift into the mysterious realm of the ship of Theseus, an ancient paradox that questions the very nature of identity and persistence through time. This isn't merely an intellectual exercise. It's a doorway into questioning what it means for anything, or anyone, to remain the same across transformation. Imagine an ancient wooden ship, the legendary vessel of Theseus, hero of Greek mythology. Over years of voyages, the ship begins to weather. One by one, each plank, rope, and sail is replaced as it deteriorates. After decades of careful maintenance, every single component has been exchanged for a new one. The question emerges like mist from the water. Is this still the same ship of Theseus? The paradox deepens when we consider that someone might have collected all the discarded original parts and reassembled them elsewhere. Now, two ships exist, one with the original materials but newly assembled, one with the original form but new materials. Which, if either, is the true ship of Theseus? This ancient thought experiment reveals the tension between different ways we conceptualize identity. Do we define things by their physical substance, their form and function, their historical continuity, or some combination of these aspects? The answer seems to shift depending on context, revealing that identity itself might be more of a useful fiction than an absolute reality. Consider how this paradox applies to your own existence. The cells that comprise your body are not the same cells you were born with. Most have been replaced many times over. Your thoughts, beliefs, and personality have transformed dramatically across your lifetime. The child you once were and the person reading these words now share a continuous history, but little else. In what sense are you the same being? Our brains and bodies change constantly, yet we maintain this powerful sense of being the same person throughout. Memory creates an illusion of continuity, stitching together disparate moments into a coherent narrative of self. Yet memory itself is imperfect, constantly being rewritten and reimagined. The memories you hold now are not identical to the experiences they supposedly preserve. Organizations face the same paradox. A corporation might replace all its employees, change its headquarters, alter its business model, and update its values. Yet legally and in public perception, it remains the same entity. A nation might completely transform its government, borders, population, and culture over centuries, while maintaining a continuous identity. Perhaps identity is less about unchanging essence and more about patterns that persist through transformation, like a river that remains the same river despite every drop of water being replaced. Or perhaps identity is simply a story we tell ourselves and each other, a useful fiction that helps us navigate a world of constant flux. Some philosophical traditions embrace this fluidity. Buddhism speaks of anicca, or impermanence, the understanding that nothing maintains an unchanging self-nature. In this view, the paradox dissolves when we release our attachment to the concept of fixed identity altogether. Nothing remains the same. Everything exists in a process of continuous becoming. The Ship of Theseus doesn't offer simple answers, only deepening questions. It suggests that what we call identity might be neither solid nor singular, but a fluid concept that serves our need for continuity in a world of perpetual change. As your consciousness drifts through these thoughts tonight, remember that the very mind contemplating this paradox is itself like Theseus's ship, constantly changing while creating the powerful illusion of remaining the same. The Sorites paradox. At what precise moment does a collection of individual grains become a heap? This deceptively simple question unveils the profound Sorites paradox, a riddle that challenges our understanding of vague terms, boundaries, and categories that we use daily without second thought. Imagine a grain of sand placed upon a table. This single grain is clearly not a heap. Add another grain, still not a heap. Add a third, a fourth, a tenth, a hundredth. At what exact point does this collection transform from not a heap into a heap? The paradox emerges from the impossibility of identifying the precise transformative moment. If adding a single grain never transforms a non-heap into a heap, then it seems no amount of grains could ever form a heap, yet heaps clearly exist. The term Sorites comes from the Greek word for heap, but this paradox extends far beyond sand piles. It applies to any concept with vague boundaries. When does a child become an adult? At what point does a collection of buildings become a city? How many hairs must one lose to become bald? When does evening become night? In each case, we confidently use these categories while being unable to precisely define their boundaries. Consider how this paradox applies to personal identity and life transitions. You don't become wise, experienced, or mature through any single moment of transformation. One day does not make you old. One grey hair doesn't make you elderly. Yet somehow, through the accumulation of imperceptible changes, these transitions occur. The paradox reveals the tension between our discrete, categorical thinking and the continuous nature of change. Our language creates the illusion of clear boundaries, where reality offers only gradual transitions. We say the shore meets the sea, but where exactly does land end and ocean begin? We speak of mountains rising from plains, but cannot identify the precise point where flat ground becomes mountainous. These categories are useful fictions rather than reflections of sharp natural divisions. The paradox deepens when we consider its implications for logic itself. If adding one grain never changes a non-heap into a heap, we could construct a logical proof that 1,000,000 grains doesn't constitute a heap, a conclusion that contradicts obvious reality. This suggests that our standard logical tools might be insufficient for dealing with vague concepts, which constitute much of our everyday experience. Some philosophers propose resolving this paradox through fuzzy logic, which allows for degrees of truth rather than binary, true, false distinctions. In this view, a collection might be somewhat a heap, mostly a heap, or definitely a heap, with these values shifting gradually as grains are added or removed. Rather than asking, is this a heap? We might ask, to what degree is this a heap? Others suggest that vague terms like heap simply have indeterminate boundaries by their very nature. The paradox arises only when we incorrectly assume such terms must have precise definitions. Perhaps some concepts are inherently boundaryless, their edges intentionally left undefined so they can flexibly adapt to different contexts. The Sorites paradox has profound implications for how we understand categories of all kinds. Race, gender, species classifications, political affiliations, mental health diagnoses. These all involve boundaries that, upon close examination, prove impossible to define with perfect precision. Yet we often treat these categories as if they were clearly delineated natural kinds, rather than useful, but imperfect human constructions. This paradox invites us to hold categories more lightly, to recognize that our linguistic divisions often impose artificial boundaries on continuous reality. It suggests that many apparent contradictions might arise not from reality itself, but from our insistence on forcing fluid experiences into rigid conceptual boxes. As your consciousness drifts through these thoughts tonight, consider how many of your certainties might rest on concepts with no definable boundaries. The Sorites paradox doesn't offer resolution, only the invitation to embrace the inherent vagueness of existence, the blurry edges where one state of being gradually transforms into another, with no single moment of metamorphosis. Perhaps wisdom begins not with seeking sharper definitions, but with becoming comfortable in the undefined spaces between our concepts. The barber paradox. Who shaves the barber? Who shaves all those who do not shave themselves? This seemingly innocent question unfolds into one of the most influential logical paradoxes ever conceived, one that ultimately transformed the very foundation of mathematics and set theory. Imagine a small village with a single barber. This barber shaves every man in the village who does not shave himself, and only those men. At first glance, this seems like a straightforward arrangement. But consider the barber himself. Does he shave himself? The paradox emerges when we follow this question to its logical conclusion. If the barber shaves himself, then he belongs to the group of men who shave themselves. But according to the rule, the barber does not shave men who shave themselves, so he cannot shave himself. Conversely, if the barber does not shave himself, then he belongs to the group of men who don't shave themselves. According to the rule, the barber shaves all such men, so he must shave himself. Either possibility leads to its own contradiction. If he shaves himself, he doesn't shave himself. If he doesn't shave himself, he does shave himself. The barber's very existence seems logically impossible, yet the description of his role appeared perfectly reasonable. This elegantly simple paradox, formulated by philosopher Bertrand Russell in 1901, isn't really about barbers at all. It's about the fundamental limits of set theory and self-reference in logical systems. Russell created this story to illustrate a profound problem he had discovered in the mathematical foundations of set theory. What happens when we define sets that contain themselves as members? Consider the set of all sets that are not members of themselves. Does this set contain itself? If it does, then by definition, it doesn't. If it doesn't, then by definition, it does. This contradiction, now known as Russell's paradox, shook the mathematical world by revealing inconsistencies in naive set theory, which was intended to provide a rigorous foundation for all mathematics. The barber story translates this abstract mathematical problem into human terms. It reveals how seemingly reasonable definitions can create logical impossibilities through self-reference. When a system is allowed to refer to itself without proper constraints, contradictions can emerge that undermine the entire logical structure. This discovery prompted mathematicians to develop more sophisticated systems with rules specifically designed to prevent such paradoxes. Just as we might resolve the barber paradox by specifying that the barber is a woman, thus outside the defined system of men being shaved, mathematicians created axiomatic set theories with safeguards against problematic self-reference. The paradox extends beyond mathematics into language and thought. Consider the statement, "This sentence is false." If it's true, then it must be false. If it's false, then it must be true. Such self-referential statements create loops of contradiction that seem to break the very rules of logic. They reveal the limits of language as a tool for describing reality without contradiction. These limitations appear in many domains. Computer programs that evaluate themselves can encounter similar logical loops. Consciousness reflecting on itself creates comparable paradoxes. How can the thing doing the thinking objectively think about itself? Legal systems face this challenge when defining their own powers and limitations. Perhaps most profoundly, the barber paradox reveals something essential about the nature of logical systems themselves. They cannot be both complete and consistent. Any system complex enough to describe itself will either contain contradictions or be unable to prove certain truths within its framework. This insight, later formalized in Gödel's incompleteness theorems, suggests that no single logical system can capture all truth without contradiction. As your consciousness drifts through these circular thoughts tonight, consider that the very mind attempting to understand these paradoxes may itself incorporate similar logical loops. The Barber paradox doesn't offer resolution, only a glimpse into the fascinating limitations of systems that attempt to define themselves. Perhaps complete logical consistency is not a feature of reality, but a human aspiration, always approached but never fully reached. The omnipotence paradox. Can an all-powerful being create a stone so heavy that even they cannot lift it? This question unveils the omnipotence paradox, a centuries-old riddle that challenges our very conception of unlimited power and has implications for theology, philosophy, and the limits of logical possibility. Imagine a deity with no limitations, capable of performing any action and creating anything conceivable. Now consider what happens when this unlimited power turns reflexively upon itself. If such a being creates a stone too heavy for anyone to lift, they should be able to lift it anyway, being all-powerful. Yet if they can lift it, then they've failed to create a stone that they cannot lift. Either way, it seems there's something this omnipotent being cannot do, which contradicts the very definition of omnipotence. The paradox emerges from the self-referential nature of unlimited power confronting its own limitations. It's similar to asking whether an unstoppable force can encounter an immovable object. The very concepts seem to mutually exclude each other. If one exists, the other cannot. This paradox has troubled theologians for centuries, particularly in traditions that attribute absolute omnipotence to God. Various solutions have been proposed, each with its own implications for how we understand divine power and the nature of logical possibility. Some argue that omnipotence shouldn't be defined as the ability to do literally anything, but rather the ability to do anything that is logically possible. In this view, creating a stone too heavy for oneself to lift is a logical contradiction rather than a real possibility, like creating a square circle or a married bachelor. An omnipotent being cannot be expected to perform logical impossibilities, as these are not real things to be done, but merely verbal contradictions. The limitation is in the concept, not in the power of the being. Others suggest that omnipotence could include the power to transcend logic itself. Perhaps an all-powerful deity could indeed create a stone too heavy to lift and simultaneously lift it, operating beyond the constraints of human logic. This perspective posits that our logical frameworks are themselves limited and cannot capture the full nature of unlimited power. Some philosophers propose that omnipotence should be understood as the ability to actualize any possible state of affairs, rather than the ability to perform any task description. Since creating a stone too heavy for an omnipotent being to lift doesn't describe a possible state of affairs, it's internally contradictory. Failing to do so doesn't limit omnipotence. The paradox extends beyond theology into fundamental questions about the nature of possibility itself. What are the limits of what can be conceptualized? Are these limits merely features of human cognition, or do they reflect something essential about reality? Can contradiction exist in reality, or only in our imperfect descriptions of it? Consider how this paradox applies to more mundane forms of power. Even the most powerful human institutions face similar reflexive limitations. Can a totally sovereign nation limit its own sovereignty? Can an ultimate authority authorize something beyond its authority? These questions reveal how self-reference creates boundaries, even within concepts designed to transcend boundaries. The paradox also invites reflection on the relationship between power and constraint. Perhaps unlimited power without any structure or limitation wouldn't be power at all, but merely chaos. Just as a language with no grammar cannot express meaning, perhaps power requires some framework within which to operate meaningfully. Some Eastern philosophical traditions embrace this paradox rather than attempting to resolve it. They suggest that the highest form of power might involve transcending the very dualities that create such contradictions, moving beyond the distinctions between possible and impossible, limitation and freedom, power and restraint. As your consciousness drifts through these contemplations tonight, consider that the very attempt to conceptualize unlimited power might reveal the inherent limitations of conceptualization itself. The omnipotence paradox doesn't offer simple resolution, only an invitation to explore the boundaries of logic, possibility, and the frameworks through which we attempt to understand the ununderstandable. The paradox of perception. How can you be certain that what you perceive as reality actually exists outside your consciousness? This fundamental question unveils the paradox of perception, the mysterious gap between our subjective experience and the objective world it supposedly represents. Imagine yourself sitting in a room, observing the colors, shapes, sounds, and textures around you. Everything seems undeniably real and present. Yet all these perceptions exist only as electrical signals interpreted by your brain. The redness of an apple doesn't exist in the world, only wavelengths of light that your visual system translates into the experience of color. The smoothness of a surface, the sweetness of honey, the warmth of sunlight, all are translations created by your nervous system rather than properties that exist independently in the world. The paradox emerges when we realize that our only access to reality comes through these very perceptions we're questioning. We can never step outside our experience to compare it with reality directly. It's like trying to verify the accuracy of a map while being unable to see the territory it supposedly represents. We're trapped within our perceptual systems, unable to know what, if anything, exists beyond them. Consider the profound implications of this situation. The entire universe as you know it, including your own body, exists for you only as a model constructed by your brain based on sensory data. Your brain itself is known to you only through this same model. The you that seems to be perceiving reality is itself part of the perceptual model. Who then is doing the perceiving? This paradox deepens when we consider the limitations of our sensory systems. Humans perceive only a narrow slice of the electromagnetic spectrum as visible light. We're blind to ultraviolet and infrared, deaf to frequencies beyond our hearing range, and oblivious to magnetic fields that guide other animals. Even within our perceptual range, our senses are easily fooled by illusions, hallucinations, and misinterpretations. If our perceptions are so limited and fallible, how can we trust them to accurately represent reality? Various philosophical traditions have grappled with this paradox. Some embrace radical skepticism, suggesting that we can never know anything about reality beyond our perceptions. Others propose representative realism, the view that our perceptions are indirect representations of a real world that may bear little resemblance to our experience of it. Still others advocate for idealism, which proposes that consciousness itself is fundamental and that the physical world exists only as experience within mind. Science has complicated this picture further. Physics describes a world of quantum fields and probability waves rather than solid objects, a reality fundamentally different from our perceptual experience of it. Neuroscience reveals that what we perceive is heavily influenced by expectation and attention. Our brains actively construct experience rather than passively receiving it. Studies of optical illusions and perceptual errors show how readily our senses can be misled. Yet paradoxically, these scientific insights themselves depend on the reliability of certain perceptions. The scientific method assumes we can trust observations of experimental results, even while revealing the limitations of perception more generally. We seem caught in a circular situation, using perception to understand the limitations of perception. Perhaps most unsettling is the possibility that our entire conceptual framework, including notions of reality, perception, and consciousness, might be limited by the structure of human cognition. We may be asking questions that make sense only within our particular way of experiencing the world, while being unable to conceive of alternatives that might better capture what exists. Some contemplative traditions suggest that through practices like meditation, it's possible to experience reality more directly, bypassing conceptual frameworks that normally constrain perception. These traditions propose that the apparent separation between perceiver and perceived might itself be an artifact of ordinary consciousness rather than a fundamental feature of reality. As your awareness drifts through these mysteries tonight, consider that the very consciousness contemplating this paradox is itself the most intimate yet enigmatic aspect of your experience. The paradox of perception doesn't offer resolution, only an invitation to hold more lightly your certainties about what exists beyond the veil of your awareness, and perhaps to marvel at the miraculous construction of experience that creates your world from moment to moment. The Schrödinger's cat paradox. What if something could be simultaneously alive and dead until observed? This seemingly impossible scenario is the essence of Schrödinger's cat, a thought experiment that illuminates the bizarre implications of quantum mechanics when bridging the microscopic and macroscopic worlds. Imagine a sealed box containing a cat, a vial of poison, a radioactive atom, and a mechanism linking them. If the atom decays, a random quantum event with 50% probability within a given time frame, the mechanism breaks the vial, releasing poison that kills the cat. If the atom doesn't decay, the cat remains alive. According to certain interpretations of quantum mechanics, until someone opens the box to observe the outcome, the radioactive atom exists in a superposition of both decayed and undecayed states simultaneously. If this is true, then the cat must exist in a superposition of both alive and dead states, neither fully alive nor fully dead, until observation collapses this quantum limbo into a single definite outcome. This thought experiment, proposed by physicist Erwin Schrödinger in 1935, wasn't intended to suggest cats could actually exist in such contradictory states. Rather, it was designed to highlight the absurdity of applying quantum principles, which work perfectly for subatomic particles, to everyday objects. The paradox emerges from the apparent incompatibility between quantum mechanics, where superposition is normal, and our classical understanding of reality, where things must be definitively one way or another. The implications of this paradox extend far beyond unfortunate felines. It raises profound questions about the nature of reality itself. Is the apparent definiteness of our everyday world merely an illusion created by observation? Does consciousness play a special role in collapsing quantum possibilities into specific realities? Or is there some scale at which quantum fuzziness naturally resolves into classical certainty, even without observation? Consider how strange our universe appears through this quantum lens. Particles can exist in multiple states simultaneously. They can be entangled with each other, instantaneously affecting one another regardless of distance. They can tunnel through seemingly impenetrable barriers. These behaviors, solidly established by experiment, defy our intuitive understanding of how the world should work. Some interpretations of quantum mechanics suggest that when observation collapses a superposition, all possibilities actually occur, but in different branches of reality that cannot interact with each other. In this many worlds interpretation, each time someone opens Schrödinger's box, the universe splits into two branches, one where observers find a living cat, another where they discover a dead one. Rather than possibilities collapsing into a single outcome, all possibilities manifest in an ever-branching multiverse. Others propose that superposition never actually reaches macroscopic scales. According to decoherence theories, interactions between quantum systems and their environments effectively suppress superpositions for larger objects, explaining why cats must be either alive or dead, regardless of observation. In this view, the paradox arises from misapplying quantum principles beyond their proper domain. The Copenhagen interpretation, long the standard view in quantum mechanics, takes a more pragmatic approach, suggesting that quantum formalism describes our knowledge of systems rather than their objective states. In this view, the wave function representing the cat's alive-dead superposition reflects our uncertainty about its condition, not an actual physical superposition of the cat itself. Beyond physics, Schrödinger's cat has become a powerful metaphor for situations involving uncertainty and observation-dependent outcomes. Consider how differently people behave when they know they're being watched versus when they believe themselves unobserved, or how the act of measuring something often changes it, whether it's taking a tire's pressure, checking a child's progress, or polling voter intentions. Perhaps most profoundly, this paradox raises questions about the role of consciousness in reality. Most physicists reject the notion that conscious observation specifically causes quantum collapse, pointing out that any physical interaction can serve as measurement. Yet the special place of observers in quantum formalism continues to trouble philosophers of science. If physical reality behaves differently when measured than when unmeasured, what does this tell us about the relationship between mind and matter? As your consciousness contemplates these quantum mysteries tonight, consider that the very neurons firing in your brain operate according to these same strange quantum principles, though their effects usually average out at larger scales. The Schrödinger's cat paradox doesn't offer resolution, only a glimpse into a reality far stranger and more ambiguous than our everyday experience suggests. A world where certainty itself may be the true illusion. The twin paradox. What if time could flow at different rates for identical twins, causing one to age significantly less than the other? This isn't science fiction, but a real consequence of Einstein's relativity theory, known as the twin paradox. a mind-bending implication of how time itself warps at high speeds. Imagine identical twins on Earth. One remains home while the other boards a spacecraft and travels at nearly the speed of light to a distant star before returning. According to special relativity, time passes more slowly for objects in motion relative to an observer. The traveling twin experiences time at a slower rate than their earthbound sibling. Upon returning home, the traveler might have aged only a few years, while the stay-at-home twin has aged decades. This isn't mere perception, it's a real difference in elapsed time that would be reflected in everything from cellular aging to wristwatches. The apparent paradox emerges when we consider the situation from the traveling twin's perspective. From their viewpoint, it's the Earth and the stay-at-home twin that moves away and then returns. Shouldn't the earthbound twin therefore be younger? If time dilation affects objects in relative motion, and motion is relative, how can both twins agree on who ages less? This seeming contradiction troubled physicists in the early days of relativity theory. The resolution lies in recognizing that the twins' situations aren't actually symmetrical. The traveling twin experiences acceleration, changing direction to return home, while the earthbound twin maintains an inertial, non-accelerating reference frame throughout. This asymmetry breaks the apparent paradox. The accelerating twin really does age less, and both siblings would agree on this outcome when reunited. What makes this paradox so profound is that it reveals time as flexible rather than absolute. Time isn't a universal constant ticking identically everywhere, but a dimension that stretches and contracts depending on relative motion and gravitational fields. The clock you're watching doesn't measure some objective cosmic time. It measures time as experienced in your specific reference frame. This isn't merely theoretical. Atomic clocks on high-speed aircraft return slightly behind their earthbound counterparts. GPS satellites must compensate for time dilation effects to maintain accuracy. Muon particles reaching Earth's surface from the upper atmosphere exist far longer than they should because, from our perspective, time runs slower for these high-speed particles. Consider the implications for potential future space travelers. A crew journeying to a star 25 light-years away at 99.9% light speed would experience only slightly more than 1 year of travel time, while more than 50 years would pass on Earth. They would return to a world where their friends and family had aged half a century, while they aged just over 2 years. Time dilation creates a one-way time travel into the future. The paradox deepens further when we consider general relativity, which shows that gravity also affects time's passage. Clocks run slightly faster at higher altitudes where gravitational fields are weaker. Your head actually ages infinitesimally faster than your feet because it exists in a slightly weaker gravitational field. Near extreme gravitational sources like black holes, these effects become dramatic. Minutes near a black hole could correspond to years passing for distant observers. Perhaps most profound is what this paradox reveals about the nature of time itself. Rather than being an absolute background against which events occur, time is woven into the fabric of reality alongside space, forming a unified space-time that curves, stretches, and warps. What we experience as the flow of time is actually our consciousness moving along a dimension as real and malleable as the 3 dimensions of space. Some philosophers suggest that this relativistic view of time supports eternalism, the concept that past, present, and future all exist equally as regions of space-time, with our sense of now being merely a subjective experience rather than a privileged moment. In this view, time doesn't flow. Rather, consciousness creates the illusion of flow by experiencing different slices of an already complete 4-dimensional reality. As your awareness contemplates these temporal distortions tonight, remember that the very biological processes allowing your consciousness exist within this flexible framework of time. The twin paradox doesn't just tell us something abstract about physics. It reveals that our most basic intuitions about time's unchanging nature are fundamentally mistaken. Reality is stranger and more wonderful than our everyday experience suggests, with time itself flowing differently depending on how and where you experience it. The free will illusion. Do you truly make choices, or is your sense of agency merely an illusion created by your brain? This question unveils the paradox of free will, a profound contradiction between our subjective experience of making decisions and the seemingly deterministic nature of the physical world. Imagine yourself at a crossroads, deliberating between 2 paths. You feel completely free to choose either direction. This sense of choice, of authoring your own actions, is perhaps the most intimate aspect of human experience. Yet increasingly, science suggests that this feeling of agency might be a compelling illusion rather than an accurate representation of how decisions actually form in your brain. Neuroscientific experiments have shown that predictable brain activity precedes conscious awareness of decisions by several seconds. In studies where participants report the moment they decided to move a finger, researchers can detect preparatory brain activity substantially before subjects felt they had made a choice. If neural processes determining your actions are underway before you're conscious of deciding, what role does your conscious self play in the decision? The paradox deepens when we consider the physical basis of thought. Your brain operates according to physical laws, with neurons firing in patterns determined by their structure, chemistry, and prior states. Every thought, feeling, and decision emerges from these physical processes. If physical systems follow deterministic laws, or even probabilistic ones in quantum mechanics, where could free choice possibly enter the equation? Either your decisions violate physical causality, which seems impossible, or they are themselves merely links in a causal chain stretching back before your birth. Yet abandoning belief in free will creates profound contradictions with our lived experience. We distinguish between actions performed freely and under coercion. Our legal systems differentiate between premeditated and accidental harms. Our entire moral framework assumes that people could have acted differently than they did. If free will is an illusion, these distinctions become questionable, even as we find ourselves unable to live without them. Some philosophers propose compatibilism, the view that determinism and free will can coexist if we properly understand what free will means. In this view, freedom doesn't require escape from causality, but rather actions that follow from your own desires, values, and reasoning without external coercion. You are free, not because your choices emerge from nowhere, but because they emerge from you, from your unique pattern of wants, beliefs, and reasoning processes. Others suggest that quantum indeterminacy might create space for genuine choice. If certain brain processes amplify quantum uncertainties, perhaps these introduce genuine openness into decision-making. However, critics note that merely replacing determinism with randomness doesn't obviously enhance freedom. Random decisions seem no more free than determined ones. The paradox extends beyond philosophy into practical questions about responsibility. If someone's choices result inevitably from their genetics, upbringing, and circumstances, factors they didn't choose, how can we hold them fully accountable? Yet simultaneously, treating people as mere products of causality rather than autonomous agents seems to diminish their humanity and dignity. Some contemplative traditions suggest a different perspective entirely. Through practices like meditation, they claim we can recognize that the sense of being a separate chooser is itself a mental construction. What we call self might be more like a process than a thing, a dynamic pattern of awareness rather than a controller making decisions. In this view, the paradox dissolves not by resolving the contradiction, but by recognizing that it stems from a mistaken premise about what we are. Modern psychology offers yet another angle. Perhaps free will isn't an all-or-nothing property, but exists on a spectrum. Decisions made while sleepwalking, under hypnosis, or during extreme emotional states involve less freedom than those made during calm reflection. Maybe freedom increases with self-awareness, with our ability to examine and modify our own decision-making processes. As your consciousness drifts through these philosophical waters tonight, consider that the very thoughts evaluating this paradox emerge from the same brain processes being questioned. The free will paradox doesn't offer resolution, only an invitation to examine the mysterious relationship between your most intimate experience of choice and the physical processes that somehow give rise to the phenomenology of being you. A being who feels, undeniably, that you are choosing your own path, even while questioning whether that feeling corresponds to reality. The happiness paradox. Why does direct pursuit of happiness so often lead to its opposite? This question unveils the happiness paradox, the mysterious contradiction that what we most deeply desire seems to evade us precisely when we chase it most determinedly. Imagine yourself deciding that, above all else, you want to be happy. You reorganize your life around this goal, constantly evaluating whether your choices are maximizing your happiness. Yet strangely, this very focus often produces anxiety, disappointment, and a nagging sense that true happiness remains just out of reach. Meanwhile, someone else engaged in challenging, meaningful activity without directly seeking happiness might find it arriving as an unexpected byproduct. The paradox emerges from happiness's peculiar nature. It tends to appear indirectly, as a side effect of engagement with life's activities, relationships, and purposes. Like trying to fall asleep by forcing yourself to sleep, the direct pursuit creates a self-consciousness that interferes with the very state being sought. Happiness seems to flourish when we focus elsewhere, yet disappears when grasped for directly. Consider the growing evidence for this paradox. Research shows that people who rate happiness as their primary value tend to be less happy than those who prioritize other values. Nations with increasing wealth and comfort often show declining happiness scores. The more options and freedoms people have to pursue pleasure, the more anxiety and depression rates seem to rise. This paradox manifests in many forms. Desperately wanting to be liked makes people less likable. Obsessing over avoiding failure often causes it. Demanding that an experience be perfect typically ruins it. Insisting that a relationship provide complete fulfillment usually diminishes both the relationship and the fulfillment. Various philosophical traditions have recognized this contradiction. Ancient Stoics advised focusing not on happiness, but on virtue, allowing well-being to emerge naturally from living according to nature and reason. Buddhist teachings suggest that suffering comes from attachment to particular outcomes, including the attachment to happiness itself. The path to contentment paradoxically involves accepting that life inevitably contains disappointment and pain. The happiness paradox deepens when we consider the nature of human adaptation. Psychological research shows that we quickly adjust to both positive and negative changes in our circumstances. A promotion, new car, or dream house provides a temporary happiness boost before we return to our baseline. This hedonic treadmill means that direct pursuit of happiness through acquiring things or achievements tends to yield diminishing returns, each success providing briefer satisfaction than anticipated. Perhaps the core of this paradox lies in happiness's relational nature. Happiness isn't a thing to be acquired, but a quality of engagement with life. It emerges from connection, to other people, to meaningful activities, to purposes beyond ourselves. When we treat happiness as an internal emotional state to be maximized, we inadvertently separate ourselves from these vital connections, creating the very isolation that undermines well-being. Modern consumer culture intensifies this paradox by promoting the idea that happiness is a product that can be purchased, achieved, or optimized. We're encouraged to evaluate experiences based on how they make us feel, rather than their meaning or value. This self-focused approach paradoxically diminishes the very happiness it aims to increase. Some philosophers suggest that the contradiction dissolves when we distinguish between types of happiness. Aristotle contrasted hedonia, pleasure and positive feelings, with eudaimonia, flourishing through virtuous, meaningful living. The latter can't be directly pursued, but emerges from living well. Perhaps the paradox exists only when we conflate these different forms of well-being. Others propose that happiness requires a certain self-forgetfulness. When we're completely absorbed in an activity, relationship, or purpose, what psychologists call a flow state, self-consciousness fades, and with it, the evaluative voice constantly asking, "Am I happy yet?" These are often,